The $1,000 garage sale that made a CEO realized she'd just handed a broken mechanic the keys to millions. While billionaire Isabella Hart laughed at the desperate single father signing away his last $1,000 for a collapsing wreck of a building, Ethan Cole was already counting the fortune hidden under those dusty tarps. She saw demolition costs. He saw retirement. This is the story of how one freezing February morning destroyed everything Isabella thought she knew about winning, and how a man everyone had written off turned trash into an empire that would haunt her for years. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in Isabella Hart's corner office cast sharp shadows across the mahogany desk, where she'd just ended another developer's dreams with a single phone call. Outside, the city sprawled beneath her like a game board she was winning, block by block, deal by deal. At 30 years old, she'd built Hart Acquisitions into something her competitors feared and her investors worshipped. She didn't get there by being nice. "Ms. Hart, your 2 o'clock is here." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, hesitant in that way that meant the appointment was probably going to waste her time. Isabella glanced at her schedule. Ethan Cole, property inquiry. She'd almost canceled twice already. The name meant nothing, and nobody's rarely brought anything interesting to her table. Send him in. The man who walked through her door looked like he'd dressed for a different meeting entirely, maybe one at a soup kitchen or a parole hearing. His jacket, some ancient Carhartt thing with oil stains ground into the canvas, hung loose on shoulders that seemed designed to carry more weight than they currently held. His jeans had holes that weren't the fashionable kind, but it was his eyes that made Isabella pause for half a second before her practiced smile slid into place. They were tired, deeply, fundamentally tired in a way that new sleep couldn't fix. "Mr. Cole." She didn't stand, didn't offer her hand. "I understand you're interested in the Riverside property." Ethan stopped a few feet from her desk, hands shoved in his pockets like a kid called to the principal's office. "The garage on Fletcher Street, yeah. I saw the listing." Isabella leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. The Riverside industrial lot had been rotting in her portfolio for 8 months, a mistake from her early days when she'd bought a cluster of properties without inspecting them closely enough. The garage itself was a liability. Asbestos in the walls, a roof that leaked worse every winter, foundation cracks you could lose a fist in. Her lawyers had advised demolition, but even that would cost 30 grand. She didn't feel like spending on a property that generated exactly zero revenue. "That listing is old," she said, which was true. "I'm not sure it's what you're looking for." "I drove by yesterday." Ethan's voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "It's exactly what I'm looking for." She studied him with the same clinical attention she gave to balance sheets. Mid-30s, maybe. Wedding ring absent, but there was a tan line where one used to live. Calluses on his hands thick enough to see from across the desk. This wasn't some trust fund kid playing at entrepreneurship or a flipper looking for easy money. This was someone at the end of something, grasping for anything that looked like a beginning. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to be direct because I respect people's time. That property is essentially worthless. The building is condemned. The land value is suppressed by environmental concerns that would cost more to remediate than you'd recover in 20 years. I've had it appraised 3 times. My own team can't find a scenario where it makes financial sense." "What are you asking for it?" Isabella almost laughed. "I'm asking what you're offering." Ethan pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket, placed it on her desk without ceremony. Inside, she found a cashier's check made out for exactly $1,000, along with a handwritten offer on notebook paper that looked like something a child might turn in for homework. This time she did laugh. Not the polite boardroom laugh she used in negotiations, but a genuine, surprised bark of amusement. "You're serious, Completely. Mr. Cole, the last property tax bill alone was $1,500. You're offering less than the city's lien." "I know." He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't desperation, which she would have recognized and exploited. It was something quieter, something like certainty. "But you're going to sell it to me anyway." The presumption should have ended the meeting. Isabella had thrown people out of her office for less. But something about the moment, the absurdity of it maybe, or just the break from her usual parade of sweating developers and nervous investors, made her curious. "Explain." Ethan shrugged. You've been trying to unload that property for months. Nobody wants it because everybody sees the same thing you see, a money pit. Me buying it for $1,000 gets it off your books, eliminates your liability, and costs you nothing but a signature. You write it off as a loss, take the tax benefit, and forget it exists. I take on all the risk, all the headache, all the cost. Isabella tapped one manicured nail against her desk. He wasn't wrong. The property was dead weight, and her accountant would be thrilled to stop seeing it on the quarterly reports. What are you planning to do with it? Does it matter? I'm curious what kind of miracle you think you can perform that 3 professional assessments couldn't find. For the first time, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. I fix things. It's what I do. You're a mechanic. Was an engineer, now I'm whatever keeps my daughter fed. There it was. The piece that made him make sense. Single father, probably divorced or widowed based on the ring situation, clinging to whatever work he could find after losing whatever career he'd built. She'd seen versions of this story before. People who'd been comfortable once, then lost it all to downsizing or death or bad luck, now scrambling in the wreckage trying to rebuild with duct tape and optimism. Isabella opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folder so thin it barely qualified as one. The entire documentation for the Fletcher Street property fit on 7 pages. She flipped it open, skimmed the highlights she already knew by heart, then slid the folder across the desk. There's asbestos, black mold. The electrical system hasn't been code compliant since 1987. The previous owner died 14 years ago, and his estate abandoned it rather than pay the cleanup costs. If you're planning to operate any kind of business there, you'll need permits that will take 6 months minimum to acquire, assuming the city even grants them, which they probably won't. Ethan picked up the folder but didn't open it. I'll figure it out. You have $1,000 to your name and a condemned garage. What exactly are you going to figure out? More than you did. The words hung in the air between them. Isabella felt her jaw tighten. She should have ended it there. Should have called security, had him escorted out, blocked his number. Instead, she pulled her phone from her blazer pocket and texted her assistant. Get Marcus up here with the Fletcher Street docs. Prepare a standard sale agreement. $1,000 purchase price. This is the stupidest business decision I've seen anyone make in 5 years, Isabella said, sliding the cashier's check into her desk drawer. And I watched a man invest his retirement in a restaurant that served only cereal. Probably. You're going to lose everything. Maybe. And when you do, don't come back here looking for sympathy or a loan or whatever people in your situation usually ask for. Ethan finally opened the folder, scanning the property assessment with the focused attention of someone who actually knew what the numbers meant. I won't need to. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later with the paperwork, shooting Isabella a confused look that she ignored. The sale agreement was boilerplate simple. Hart Acquisitions conveyed all rights and interests in the property located at 847 Fletcher Street to Ethan Cole for the sum of $1,000 as is, with no warranties or representations. Ethan read it twice, slow and careful, before signing his name in cramped handwriting that suggested he'd learned penmanship from someone who valued precision. Isabella signed without reading. She'd written versions of this document 100 times. You'll need to handle the title transfer yourself, she said, sliding her copy into the folder. My assistant will send you the contact information for the county office. Tax bills go directly to you starting next quarter. Any environmental violations, code enforcement, or civil liability is your responsibility exclusively. Understood. She expected him to leave. Instead, he stood there holding the folder like it contained something valuable, looking at her with that same quiet certainty that had bothered her before. You're going to regret this, she said. Not the sale. You should be thanking me for taking your money. But whatever plan you have in your head, it's not going to work. I've seen 1,000 men like you try to build something from nothing. It doesn't happen. Not anymore. The game is rigged for people who already have money. Probably right about that too. Then why are you doing this? Ethan folded the property docs and tucked them inside his jacket, right over his heart, like they mattered. Because my daughter asked me last week if we were going to be okay, and I didn't have an answer, so I'm making one. He left without another word, closing the door behind him with the gentleness of someone who was used to not disturbing people. Isabella sat alone in her office, staring at the cashier's check in her drawer, feeling something she rarely felt and couldn't quite name. It wasn't quite pity. Wasn't quite respect. It was closer to recognition. Well, the garage at 847 Fletcher Street sat at the dead end of an industrial block that the city had forgotten sometime during the previous century. On one side, a chain-link fence guarded a concrete lot where trucks had once parked, but now only weeds grew. On the other, a boarded-up factory that had made furniture until the owner fled to Mexico to avoid his creditors. The building itself was exactly as bad as Isabella's assessments had promised. A squat brick structure with windows either broken or painted black from inside, a rolling bay door rusted half open like a mouth caught mid-scream, and a roof that sagged in the middle like a broken spine. Ethan pulled his 15-year-old Tacoma into the gravel lot and killed the engine. Through the dirty windshield, the garage looked worse than it had during his first visit. February wind pushed trash against the foundation in drifts that almost looked intentional. A shopping cart lay on its side near the entrance, one wheel still spinning slowly in the breeze. He'd been sitting there for maybe 5 minutes when his phone buzzed. Text from Mason. "You actually buy that shithole?" "Yeah." "You're an idiot." "Probably." "When do we start?" Ethan smiled at his phone. Mason Reeves had been his best friend since sophomore year of high school, back when they'd both thought they were going to play college football, until reality and ACL tears had informed them otherwise. Mason worked construction now, good money but seasonal, and he'd been the only person Ethan had told about the garage plan, the only person who hadn't immediately tried to talk him out of it. "Tomorrow, sunrise, bring coffee. Bring tools?" Ethan pocketed his phone and climbed out of the truck. The February air bit at his face, carrying the smell of rust and old motor oil. He approached the bay door, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It screamed upward on tracks that hadn't seen grease in a decade, revealing the interior inch by painful inch. Darkness first, then shapes. The garage bay was maybe 40 feet deep and 30 wide, with a ceiling high enough to accommodate a lift if you could find one that still worked. Oil stains covered the concrete floor in abstract patterns that told the story of decades of automotive work. Tool benches lined the left wall, buried under junk and debris. On the right, a small office with windows so dirty they were basically walls. And everywhere, covering most of the open floor space like sleeping giants, blue tarps stretched over mysterious shapes. Ethan had noticed them during his first visit, had noticed them and felt his heart rate spike in a way it hadn't since his daughter was born. He'd forced himself not to investigate then, not to lift the tarps and confirm what he suspected, because if he was wrong, he might have lost his nerve entirely. But now the property was his. The tarps were his. Whatever lay beneath them belonged to him. He pulled a flashlight from his jacket and stepped inside. The first tarp came off with a cloud of dust that made him cough into his elbow. Beneath it, a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro SS, hugger orange paint dulled by years but still visible, chrome bumpers pitted with rust, but the body relatively straight. The hood was up, engine partially disassembled, parts scattered across the front seats like someone had been interrupted mid-surgery and never came back. Ethan felt something catch in his chest. He moved to the second tarp. A 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, Brittany blue, sitting on flat tires with the front end jacked up on blocks. The interior was trashed. Mice had built condos in the upholstery, but the body was solid. No major rust. No collision damage. Just neglect. The third tarp. Another Mustang. This one a 65 coupe in Wimbledon white. Completely disassembled, parts organized in milk crates and cardboard boxes stacked against the wall. Someone had been restoring this one with care before abandoning it. By the time Ethan uncovered the fourth car, his hands were shaking. A 1972 De Tomaso Pantera. Bright red, low and aggressive Italian bodywork wrapped around American muscle. One of maybe 7,000 ever made, worth more than everything else in the garage combined if it was complete, if it ran, if it wasn't just a shell. He walked around it, slowly playing his flashlight across the body. Dings and scratches, sure, faded paint, but no rust-through, no obvious structural damage. He tried the door, locked, peered through the window at an interior that looked surprisingly intact. Ethan sat down on this concrete floor, back against the Mustang, flashlight balanced on his knee. Around him, 4 classic cars nobody wanted, hidden in a garage nobody wanted, in a neighborhood nobody wanted. His entire plan had hinged on this moment, on the gamble that the shapes under those tarps were exactly what his research and instincts suggested they might be. And now, sitting in the cold dark, he felt the full weight of what he'd just committed to. These cars were worth money, real money, but only if he could restore them, only if he could find buyers, only if the market stayed strong and his skills stayed sharp, and 100 other variables broke his way. It was insane. Isabella had been right about that. Any rational person would have walked away from this garage, from these cars, from the entire impossible idea of turning rust and abandonment into something that could save his family. But Ethan had stopped being rational somewhere around the third missed mortgage payment on a house he no longer owned. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from his sister, Claire. "Emma wants to know if you're coming to dinner Sunday." Emma, his daughter. 8 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with dinosaurs and volleyball, and asking questions Ethan couldn't answer, like whether they were going to be okay, like whether they'd have to move again, like why her mom left and when she was coming back. Ethan typed, "Tell her yes, and tell her I have a surprise." He stood up, pocketed his phone, and started walking the garage methodically, making mental notes. The roof needed work immediately. He could see daylight through gaps in several places, and water damage stained the walls. The electrical panel looked like it belonged in a museum. Plumbing was probably shot. Heat was non-existent. But the foundation seemed solid, the walls were straight, and the bay door functioned. It was a start. More than that, it was everything. Ethan spent the rest of that day doing something that would have made Isabella laugh until she cried. Making plans. He sat in the garage's trashed office with a yellow legal pad, sketching out restoration priorities, estimating costs, calculating timelines. The Camaro first, it was closest to complete, needed mostly reassembly and cosmetic work. Sell it fast, use that money to fund the Mustang. Sell that, fund the next one. Bootstrap the whole operation on nothing but skill and borrowed time. His phone died around 6. By the time he made it back to the apartment he was renting month to month across town, it was past 8. The building was one of those grim complexes where the carpet smelled like cigarettes nobody was smoking, and the walls were thin enough to hear conversations you didn't want to hear. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, keys already in hand. Inside, his sister Claire was doing dishes while Emma sat at the kitchen table working on homework with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was avoiding something else. "Hey, kiddo," Ethan said, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. Emma looked up, and her face split into a grin that made everything worth it. Every stupid decision, every risk, every moment of doubt. "Dad, Aunt Claire said you had a meeting with a really important person." "I did. What happened?" Ethan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. "I bought a garage." Emma's nose wrinkled. "Like for parking? Like for fixing cars?" Claire appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, eyebrows raised in that expression she'd perfected over 32 years of being his older sister. "You actually went through with it." "I did." "Ethan, we talked about this. I know what we talked about." He kept his voice level, aware of Emma listening. "And I'm doing it anyway." Claire and Ethan had been having the same argument in various forms for the past year, ever since his wife Sarah had left and taken with her the last stability his life had known. Claire wanted him to be practical, get a stable job, work for someone else, build towards something safe and predictable. She meant well. She always meant well. But she didn't understand that safe and predictable had stopped existing for him the day his engineering firm downsized and he'd landed in a job market that didn't want 40-somethings with gaps in their resume. Actually, he was 32, but he felt 40. "We'll talk about this later," Claire said, which meant they'd argue about it later when Emma wasn't around. "Sure." Emma, oblivious to the tension or choosing to ignore it, leaned forward with her elbows on the table. "Can I see it?" "The garage." "Yeah." Ethan glanced at Claire, who shrugged in a way that meant your funeral. "This weekend," he said. "If you finish your homework and stop giving your aunt trouble about bedtime." "I don't give her trouble." "Emma." "Okay, maybe a little trouble." After Emma went to bed, Ethan and Claire sat in the kitchen drinking coffee that was too old and too weak, but better than nothing. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of someone's TV through the wall, a game show with canned laughter. "Tell me you have an actual plan," Claire said finally. "I have an actual plan." "That's not the same as a good plan." Ethan wrapped both hands around his mug, feeling the warmth. "There are 4 cars in that garage worth maybe $500,000 if I can restore them. The Camaro alone should bring 70, 80,000 once it's done. And how much is it going to cost to restore it? Parts, paint, labor, if I can't do it myself, maybe 20 grand, which you don't have." "Not yet." Claire set down her mug harder than necessary. "Ethan, you just spent your last $1,000 on a condemned building in the worst part of town. You have a daughter who needs stability, not her father playing out some fantasy about being a car restorer." "It's not a fantasy." "Then what is it?" He looked at his sister, older than him by 4 years, steadier by a lifetime, working 2 jobs herself to make ends meet after her own divorce. She'd taken them in without hesitation when he'd lost the house. Let them crash in her spare room for 3 months until he could scrape together enough for this terrible apartment. She had every right to question his choices. "It's the only option I've got left," he said quietly. "I've applied to 47 engineering jobs in the past year." 47. "You know how many interviews I got?" 3. "You know how many offers?" 0. "I'm overqualified for entry-level work and underqualified for management. Too expensive to hire, too old to train. So I take repair jobs. I fix furnaces and unclog drains and replace rotted deck boards. I make enough to cover rent and food and nothing else. No savings, no emergency fund. Nothing for Emma's future. This garage, these cars, it's a shot. Maybe the only shot I'm going to get." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "What happens if it doesn't work?" "Same thing that happens if I don't try. We stay broke, we stay stuck. Emma keeps asking questions I can't answer." "She's 8, Ethan. She doesn't need you to be a success story. She needs you to be present." "I know." And he did. But he also knew what it felt like to watch your kid's face when you had to tell her no about things that shouldn't be luxuries. New shoes, school trips, birthday parties at places that cost money. "I'm going to make this work." Claire reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I hope you're right. I really do. But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't risk everything on pride." "I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Because everything was already at risk, and pride was the only thing keeping him vertical. Mason showed up the next morning at 5:30 with coffee so strong it could strip paint and a toolbox that had survived 3 construction jobs and a divorce. He took one look at the garage and whistled low. "Man, Isabella Hart really saw you coming." "She thinks she did." They stood in the gravel lot watching the sun come up behind the factory, turning the sky purple and orange. Mason was shorter than Ethan, built like someone who'd spent 20 years lifting heavy things, with a beard he claimed made him look distinguished, and everyone else claimed made him look homeless. "So what's the play?" Mason asked. Ethan unlocked the bay door and heaved it open. In the morning light, the cars looked worse, sun highlighting every scratch, every dent, every year of neglect. But they also looked more real, more possible. "Camaro first," Ethan said. "Engine's mostly there, just needs reassembly. We get it running, fix the body, sell it fast. Use that money for parts for the Mustang." Mason walked around the Camaro, hands in his pockets. "You know I don't know shit about cars, right? You know about building things. That's enough. How much time we got?" "Before what?" "Before you run out of money." Ethan did the math in his head. Rent was due in 3 weeks. He had maybe $800 in his checking account after buying the property, another $200 in cash. The next repair job he had lined up would bring in $400, but that was a week away. Not much. Then we better get started. They spent that first day just cleaning, hauling trash out of the garage in contractor bags, sweeping decades of dirt off the floor, scrubbing the windows until they could actually see through them. Mason brought a shop vac from his truck, and they vacuumed the Camaro's interior until the original black carpet showed through. Small victories, but they felt huge. Around noon, they broke for lunch, sandwiches from a gas station, eaten sitting on the Camaro's hood. "You really think you can pull this off?" Mason asked. Ethan chewed slowly, looking around the garage. In better light, he could see more problems. Water damage. electrical conduit hanging loose. The office door didn't close all the way, but he could also see the bones of something good. High ceilings, solid brick walls, enough space to work. "I have to," he said. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." Mason nodded like he understood because maybe he did. They'd both been broke before. Both scrambled. The difference was Mason had accepted that scrambling was just life now, had made peace with it. Ethan couldn't, wouldn't. Emma deserved better than a father who'd given up. They worked until dark, making the kind of progress that wouldn't show in photos but mattered anyway. By the time Mason left, the garage felt less like a tomb and more like a workshop. Ethan stayed another hour, standing in the middle of the bay, imagining what it could become. Not just a restoration shop, a real business, something with a name, a reputation, something Emma could be proud of. His phone buzzed. Text from Emma. "Aunt Claire says I can see the garage Saturday. Can't wait to show you. Is it cool?" Ethan looked around the dirty, broken, beautiful space. "Coolest place in the city? Liar?" He smiled. "You'll see." The work fell into a rhythm. Mornings, Ethan would drop Emma at school, then head to whatever repair job he'd booked. Afternoons and evenings, he'd meet Mason at the garage. Weekends, they'd work sunrise to sunset, making slow, painful progress on the Camaro. The engine came together first. Ethan had learned to rebuild motors from his father, back when the old man had run a tiny shop on the south side, and Ethan had spent summers covered in grease, learning that machines made sense in ways people often didn't. The Camaro's 396 big block had been apart for years, but whoever had disassembled it had done it right. The parts were organized, labeled, stored carefully. It took 3 weeks to clean everything, replace gaskets and seals, check tolerances, and bolt it all back together. The first time they tried to fire it up, nothing happened. The second time, it coughed and died. The third time, at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night with Mason holding a flashlight and Ethan praying to nobody in particular, the engine caught and roared to life, shaking the entire garage, filling the space with the sound of American muscle coming back from the dead. Mason whooped. Ethan just stood there, feeling something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Hope. They got the Camaro running reliably, then started on the body. Mason wasn't a painter, but he was careful, and careful was enough. They sanded the orange paint down to bare metal, filled dents with body filler, primed everything twice. Ethan found a painter willing to work cheap in exchange for future work once the business got established. A kid named Carlos who was trying to build his own portfolio and didn't ask too many questions about why Ethan was paying in cash. Money became the constant problem. Every part cost more than Ethan budgeted. Every surprise, and there were always surprises, required solutions that cost money he didn't have. He started selling tools he wasn't using, sold his mountain bike, sold the good TV from the apartment, and told Emma the cheap one worked better anyway. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. Claire kept pushing him to quit, to get a real job, to stop throwing money into a garage that might never make him anything back. He kept not quitting. 3 months after buying the property, the Camaro was done. Hugger orange paint gleaming, chrome polished, interior reupholstered in black vinyl, engine tuned so precisely it purred. Ethan took photos from every angle, posted them on every classic car forum and marketplace he could find, priced it at $75,000. The first offer came in at $40,000. He countered at $70,000. They settled at $62,000, cash, buyer site unseen. When the money hit his account, Ethan sat in the garage office staring at his phone, unable to process that it was real. $62,000, more money than he'd seen in one place since his last engineering paycheck. Enough to fund the Mustang restoration, enough to make rent for a year, enough to prove this insane gamble might actually work. He called Mason. "We did it," he said when Mason picked up. "Did what?" "Sold the Camaro, $62,000. Silence on the other end, then, "You're shitting me." "I'm not. Ethan, that's real money." "I know. So what now?" Ethan looked at the Mustang, still sitting on blocks, still waiting. "Now we do it again. Better this time." But before the Mustang, he did something else. He took Emma to Target and told her to pick out new shoes. Any shoes she wanted. She chose light-up sneakers that cost $40 and looked at him like he'd handed her the world. Then he took her to the garage and showed her everything. The cars, the tools, the space he was building into something that mattered. Emma walked around the Mustang, running her small hand along the dusty fender. "You're going to fix this one too?" "That's the plan." "And then what?" "And then the next one. And the next one after that." She looked up at him with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. "Yeah, kiddo, we're going to be okay." This time, he believed it. The Mustang fought him from the start. Where the Camaro had been straightforward, a puzzle with missing pieces but clear instructions, the 67 Fastback was a mess of half-finished ideas and previous owner mistakes. Someone had started the restoration with ambition but no follow-through, cutting corners that now required twice the work to fix properly. The floor pans were rusted through in spots Ethan hadn't noticed until he got the car up on jack stands. The wiring harness had been butchered by someone who apparently thought electrical tape solved everything. And the engine, a 289 V8 that should have been bulletproof, had a crack in the block that meant starting over from scratch. Ethan stood under the car on a creeper, flashlight clenched between his teeth, staring at the rust hole and doing math that didn't work. New floor pans would run $800. The replacement engine block he'd found online was another $1,200. That was $2,000 before he even touched the transmission, the suspension, the brake system that looked like it hadn't been serviced since Nixon was president. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, he rolled out from under the Mustang and checked the screen. 3 texts from Claire, each more insistent than the last. "Call me Ethan." "Seriously? Call me now." Emma's school called. His heart dropped into his stomach. He hit dial before his brain could catch up with his panic. Claire answered on the first ring. "Where have you been?" "Working." "What happened? Is Emma okay?" "She's fine, physically, but her teacher called because she got into a fight during recess." Ethan sat up too fast, banged his head on the Mustang's rocker panel, swore, "Emma doesn't fight." "Well, she did today. Split another girl's lip. The principal wants to meet with you tomorrow morning." "What the hell happened?" Claire's voice softened. "The other girl said something about Emma's clothes. Called them thrift store trash or something. Emma hit her." Ethan closed his eyes. Emma had been wearing the same rotation of outfits for months now, everything purchased from Goodwill or handed down from Claire's friends' kids. He'd promised himself he'd buy her new clothes once the Camaro sold, but then the money had gone straight into parts for the Mustang, into keeping the garage running, into the endless pit of expenses that came with trying to build something from nothing. "I'll be there," he said. "Ethan, she's acting out. She needs stability. She needs you present, not buried in that garage 16 hours a day." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're choosing those cars over your daughter." The words hit harder than they should have because they weren't entirely wrong. Ethan had been spending every waking moment at the garage, coming home after Emma was asleep, leaving before she woke up. Weekends were supposed to be their time, but he'd been pulling Mason in for marathon sessions, trying to make up for lost time, pushing to get the Mustang done before the money from the Camaro evaporated. "I'm trying to build her a future," he said, but it sounded weak even to him. "She's 8. She doesn't need a future. She needs a father who shows up for dinner." Claire hung up before he could respond. Ethan sat on the garage floor, back against the Mustang's tire, phone dangling from his hand. Around him, the garage was quiet except for the sound of wind pushing through gaps in the roof. He'd patched the worst leaks but hadn't had time or money for a proper fix. Every time it rained, he spent an hour moving tarps and buckets, trying to keep the cars dry. Mason walked in carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches from the bodega on the corner. He took one look at Ethan's face and stopped. "What happened?" "Emma got into a fight at school." "Emma? Your Emma?" Some kid made fun of her clothes. Mason set down the food and coffee, lowered himself to the floor next to Ethan. They sat there for a minute in silence, 2 guys in their 30s sitting on a dirty garage floor because it was easier than facing everything that was broken outside these walls. "You know what my old man used to say?" Mason asked finally. "What?" "Nothing worth having comes without a cost, but sometimes the cost is too high and you're just too stubborn to see it. Your dad was a pessimist. My dad was right about most things." Mason grabbed one of the coffee cups and handed it to Ethan. "Look, I get what you're trying to do here. I respect it. But Claire's got a point. What good is building an empire if Emma hates you by the time it's done?" Ethan took a long drink of coffee that was too hot and burned his tongue. I'm giving her everything I've got. Maybe she needs less of everything and more of you. It was the kind of simple truth that felt impossible to argue with and equally impossible to act on. Because if Ethan stopped now, if he pulled back from the garage and the cars and the impossible dream of making this work, then what? They'd still be broke. Emma would still be wearing secondhand clothes. The only difference would be that he'd have given up, proven to himself and everyone else that he couldn't hack it. But if he kept going and lost Emma in the process, what would any of it matter? I'll talk to her, Ethan said. You'll do more than talk to her. You'll show up, take her to breakfast before school, help with homework, be present. And the Mustang? Mason shrugged. The Mustang will still be here. These cars have been waiting 40 years. They can wait another few months. Ethan knew Mason was right. Knew it in the same way he knew the Mustang's floor pans were shot and the wiring was garbage. But knowing didn't make it easier to accept. They worked the rest of the day in silence, cutting out the rusted floor sections with an angle grinder, metal sparks flying in arcs that looked almost beautiful. The physical work felt good, helped quiet the noise in Ethan's head. By the time they called it quits at 7, they'd removed all the bad metal and started fitting the replacement pans. Progress. Slow and painful, but progress. Ethan made it home by 8:30. Emma was already in bed, but he knocked on her door anyway. She was sitting up with a book, one of those thick fantasy novels with dragons on the cover that she'd been reading for weeks. Hey, kiddo. She looked up, and he could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were puffy, and there was a defiance in her expression that reminded him uncomfortably of himself. Aunt Claire told you, she said. She did. Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the nest of stuffed animals she still kept, even though she claimed she was too old for them. You want to tell me your side? Emma's jaw tightened. Madison said my shirt looked like it came from a dead person's closet. She said poor people shop at Goodwill, and that's why everything I wear is ugly. So you hit her. So I hit her. No apology in her voice, just flat fact. Emma, you can't go around hitting people. Why not? You said I should stand up for myself. I said stand up for yourself, not assault people. She was being mean. People are going to be mean your whole life. You can't punch everyone who says something you don't like. Emma's eyes flashed. You would have. The words hung between them, and Ethan realized she was right. He would have. Hell, he'd gotten into more than one fight as a kid over exactly the kind of thing Madison had said. He'd broken a kid's nose in 7th grade for making fun of his dad's beat-up truck. Got suspended for a week and had to write an apology letter he didn't mean. You're right, he said finally. I probably would have, but that doesn't make it okay. Then what am I supposed to do? Just let her say mean things? Ethan thought about Isabella Hart laughing at him in her office, about every contractor who'd quoted him double because they thought he was desperate, about the engineering firms that hadn't even bothered to send rejection letters. You're supposed to prove her wrong, not by fighting, by showing her that where your clothes come from doesn't define who you are. That's stupid. Maybe. But it's also true. Emma picked at a loose thread on her comforter. Madison's dad drives a Mercedes. She gets new clothes for every season. She went to Disney World twice last year. I know, kiddo. We can't even afford new shoes without it being a big deal. The words cut deeper than Ethan expected. That's gonna change. You always say that. I mean it this time. Emma looked at him with an expression too old for her face. Are you working on those cars because we need the money, or because you like it better than being here? The question landed like a punch to the throat. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find words that would be both true and not devastating. Both, he said finally. I work on the cars because we need the money, but yeah, sometimes it's easier to be there than to be here watching you go without things you should have. I don't care about things. You should. Kids should get to be kids without worrying about money. But we do have to worry about money, so maybe stop pretending we don't. She was 8 years old and talking like someone's accountant. Ethan felt something crack in his chest. You're right. I'm sorry. I've been so focused on trying to fix everything that I forgot to just be your dad. Emma's defiance wavered. I miss you. I'm right here. No, you're not. You're at the garage. Or you're thinking about the garage, or you're too tired from the garage to do anything else. Ethan reached out and pulled her into a hug that she resisted for exactly 2 seconds before melting into it. She smelled like kid shampoo and the lavender detergent Claire used. "I'm gonna do better," he said into her hair. "I promise." "You promised last time." "This time I mean it." She pulled back and looked at him with her mother's skeptical expression. "Prove it." "How?" "Take me to school tomorrow. Walk me in. Stay for breakfast." "I have a meeting with your principal. After that, stay for the parent breakfast thing. It's dumb, but everyone else's parents go." Ethan thought about the Mustang sitting in the garage, the floor pans that needed welding, the deadline he'd set for himself that was already slipping. Then he looked at his daughter's face and realized Mason had been right. The cars could wait. "Okay," he said, "I'll stay." Emma's smile was worth more than every dollar the Camaro had brought in. The next morning, Ethan wore his least oil-stained jeans and a button-down shirt Claire had bought him for a job interview he'd never gotten. He walked Emma into school, met with Principal Morrison, a tired-looking woman who'd clearly had this conversation 1,000 times before, and accepted Emma's 3-day suspension with the understanding that another incident would mean expulsion. Then he went to the parent breakfast in the cafeteria and stood awkwardly by the coffee station while other parents networked and chatted about soccer schedules and vacation plans. He was easily the scruffiest person there, surrounded by tech workers and lawyers and people whose biggest problem was deciding between the Tesla or the Range Rover. Emma found him after 20 minutes and dragged him over to meet her friends, a cluster of 8-year-old girls who looked at him with the polite interest children reserve for adults who might be interesting or might be boring. "This is my dad," Emma announced. "He fixes really expensive cars." "What kind of cars?" one girl asked. "Classic cars. Mustangs and Camaros and stuff that's worth like $1 million. Ethan didn't correct her math. "Let her have this." "That's cool," another girl said. The kind of cool that meant it genuinely was. "My dad just does computer stuff." They pelted him with questions about the cars, about whether he'd ever seen a Lamborghini, about whether he could fix their parents' minivans. Ethan answered as best he could, watching Emma glow with something he realized she'd been missing: pride. She was proud of him, even with the oil under his fingernails and the cheap shirt and the truck that was older than she was. When the breakfast ended and he walked her to class, Emma hugged him tight enough to crack ribs. "Thanks for coming, Dad." "Thanks for making me come." He drove back to the garage feeling lighter than he had in months. Mason was already there, had started fitting the new floor pans without him. "How'd it go?" Mason asked. "Better than I expected." "Emma okay?" "She's suspended for 3 days, but yeah, she's okay." They worked through the afternoon, welding the floor pans in place, grinding the seams smooth, treating everything with rust preventative. It was tedious work, the kind that couldn't be rushed, but Ethan found himself enjoying it in a way he hadn't been lately. The pressure he'd been putting on himself, to work faster, to finish sooner, to prove everyone wrong immediately, had been turning the garage into just another job instead of what it was supposed to be. A chance to build something that mattered. Around 3, a black Mercedes pulled into the gravel lot. Ethan glanced up from his work, didn't recognize the car. A man in his 50s climbed out, wearing casual wealth, expensive jeans, a cashmere sweater, leather shoes that cost more than Ethan's truck. He walked into the garage with the confidence of someone used to being welcomed everywhere. "Help you?" Ethan asked, setting down his welding torch. The man extended his hand. "Richard Castellano. I bought a Camaro from you a few months ago, the orange one." Ethan shook his hand, surprised. "Right. How's it running?" "Like a dream. Best money I've spent in years." Richard walked around the Mustang, hands in his pockets, examining the work with an eye that suggested he knew what he was looking at. "What are you working on now?" "67 Mustang Fastback, Resto Mod build. Planning to keep the classic look but upgrade the engine, suspension, brakes." "Ambitious. That's one word for it." Richard smiled. "I have a friend who's looking for someone to restore a 69 GTO, complete basket case. Been sitting in his barn for 30 years. He's been calling shops all over the state, but everyone wants 6 months and $100,000. I told him I might know someone who could do it for less." Ethan's heart rate picked up. A GTO restoration would be serious money, enough to fund the rest of the Mustang work, and maybe start on the Pantera. "I'd need to see the car first, figure out what we're working with." "Of course. I can set up a meeting if you're interested." "I'm interested. Richard pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. I'm sending you his contact info. His name is Marcus Webb. Mention my name and he'll know you're legit. They talked for another 10 minutes about the Camaro, about the work Ethan was planning for the Mustang, about the classic car market in general. Richard was one of those guys who collected cars the way some people collected stamps, not for investment, but because he genuinely loved them. He'd owned 37 classic cars over the years, currently had a garage with 8, including the Camaro. After he left, Mason let out a low whistle. That's the kind of customer you need more of. No kidding. Guy shows up in a Mercedes to tell you how much he loves the car you sold him, offers to send more work your way. That's not luck, man. That's reputation. Ethan looked around the garage, still rough, still unfinished, but starting to feel like a real business. We're getting there. Yeah, we are. The meeting with Marcus Webb happened 3 days later at a horse farm 40 minutes outside the city. The property was old money. White fences, manicured pastures, a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Marcus himself was in his 70s, a retired surgeon with more money than time and a garage full of projects he'd never finish. The GTO was everything Richard had promised, a complete disaster. The body was more rust than metal, the interior had been turned into a rat hotel, and the engine was seized solid. But the frame was straight, the VIN matched, and it was a Judge, the high-performance variant that collectors paid stupid money for. I'll be straight with you, Marcus said, walking around the car with a cane. Every shop I've called wants to restore this thing to Concours condition. Charge me a fortune, take forever, turn it into a museum piece I'm afraid to drive. I don't want that. I want it running, looking good, but built to be driven. Can you do that? Ethan did quick math. Parts would be expensive. GTO stuff was getting harder to find. Labor would be brutal. This wasn't a cleanup job. This was a complete rebuild. But Marcus wasn't asking for perfection. He was asking for functional. $75,000, Ethan said. 6 months. You'll have a car you can drive every weekend without worrying about it. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Richard said you were honest, said you did good work. That true? I hope so. Most restorers I've met talk a big game, promise the world. Then 6 months turns into 2 years and 75 becomes 150. I won't do that to you. How do I know? Ethan met his eyes. Because I can't afford to. I'm building a reputation, not just a business. You trust me with this car, I'll trust you to tell your friends if I do right by you. Marcus smiled. Fair enough. Draw up a contract and send it over. Half up front, half on delivery. They shook hands. Ethan drove back to the garage feeling like he'd just won the lottery. $37,000 up front would cover the Mustang work and then some. The back-end payment would fund the Pantera. For the first time since buying the garage, he could see a clear path forward that didn't require miracles. Mason was waiting when he got back. Well? We got it. The GTO? 75 grand, half now, half when it's done. Mason grabbed him in a bear hug that lifted Ethan off his feet. We're doing it, man. We're actually doing it. They celebrated with pizza and cheap beer, sitting on upturned buckets in the garage while rain hammered the roof. The leaks had gotten worse. Ethan was going to have to bite the bullet and pay for proper repairs soon. But tonight, with a real contract in hand and money coming, it felt manageable. You know what this means, right? Mason said, gesturing at the cars with his beer bottle. You're not just fixing cars anymore. You're running a business. Scary thought. Nah, man, you've been running a business this whole time. You just didn't have customers who could pay what you're worth. Ethan looked at the Mustang, still torn apart, still months from completion. Think we can handle 2 builds at once? We're gonna have to. GTO timeline doesn't give us a choice. They spent the rest of the night sketching out schedules, figuring out what work could overlap, what needed to be sequential. It was the kind of planning Ethan used to do in his engineering days, the kind of problem solving that made his brain light up in ways that pure mechanical work didn't. By midnight, they had a rough plan that might actually work if nothing went catastrophically wrong, which of course meant something would go catastrophically wrong. The money from Marcus Webb hit Ethan's account on a Friday. By Monday, half of it was already spoken for. Parts orders for both the Mustang and the GTO. A payment to Carlos for paint work on the Mustang. New welding equipment because the old setup kept tripping breakers. Ethan also did something he'd been putting off for months. He hired help. The kid's name was Tommy Nguyen. 19 years old, fresh out of a technical program, and eager enough to work for cheap because he wanted experience more than money. He showed up on his first day in pristine Dickies that would be destroyed within a week, and a toolbox his parents had clearly bought him for graduation. "I don't know much about classic cars," Tommy admitted, "but I'm good with my hands and I learn fast." "That's all I need," Ethan said. Having a third person in the garage changed everything. Suddenly, tasks that used to take Ethan and Mason 4 hours took 2. Tommy handled the grunt work, sanding, cleaning, parts runs, freeing Ethan to focus on the technical rebuilds and Mason to handle fabrication. The garage got louder, messier, more chaotic. It felt alive. Emma started coming by after school some days, doing homework in the office while Ethan worked. She'd wander out periodically to ask questions about the cars, to show him math problems she couldn't figure out, to remind him that the world existed outside these walls. Claire still worried, still pushed back on how much time he spent working, but even she had to admit things were different now. Better. The Mustang came together slowly. Ethan had been right about the engine. The cracked block meant starting from scratch. He found a rebuilt 302 from a supplier in Nevada, spent 3 days adapting it to the Mustang's transmission, another week tuning the fuel injection system. The suspension got upgraded with modern shocks and springs that would make the car actually handle. The brakes went from drums to discs. Every upgrade cost money, but every upgrade also added value. By late summer, the Mustang was running. Not done, the interior still needed work, the paint wasn't perfect, a dozen small things remained, but running. Ethan took it out for a test drive on a Sunday morning, Emma riding shotgun, and felt the car come alive under his hands. It was faster than the Camaro, more precise, more refined. A car someone would actually want to drive instead of just look at. "Can we keep this one?" Emma asked, watching the scenery blur past. "Can't afford to." "But it's so cool." "That's why someone will pay good money for it." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever get sad? Fixing these cars and then just giving them away?" Ethan considered the question. "Sometimes, but I like knowing they're going to people who'll appreciate them. Every car we restore is one less piece of history rotting in a barn somewhere." "That's a very dad answer." "I'm a dad. It's kind of my job." Emma grinned and turned up the radio. Some pop song Ethan didn't recognize, but let play anyway because it made her happy. He listed the Mustang at $85,000. Within a week, he had 3 serious offers. Within 2 weeks, he'd agreed to sell it to a collector in California for $82,000, with the buyer handling shipping. The money hit his account on a Tuesday, and Ethan sat in the garage office staring at his balance the same way he had after the Camaro sale. Except this time, the number was bigger. This time, he had momentum. The GTO was proving harder than expected. Marcus hadn't been exaggerating about the rust. Ethan and Tommy spent 3 weeks just cutting out bad metal and welding in patches, basically rebuilding the entire floor and quarter panels from scratch. The engine rebuild alone took a month. The block had to be bored, the heads rebuilt, every gasket and seal replaced. But the work was good, solid, the kind of restoration that would last another 50 years if the next owner took care of it. Mason pulled Ethan aside one day in late September. "I need to talk to you about something." The tone made Ethan look up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I got offered a foreman position, construction gig up north, real money, benefits, the whole deal." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "You taking it?" "I don't know. That's why I'm talking to you." Mason leaned against the workbench. "This has been fun, man, building this with you, but I got 2 kids and an ex-wife who wants more child support. I can't keep working for pizza and the promise of future money." "How much do you need?" Mason named a figure that was more than fair and less than Ethan could afford to pay regularly. "I'm not asking you to match the construction gig, but I need to know this is going somewhere. That 6 months from now, a year from now, you're going to have enough work to keep me on full time." Ethan looked around the garage. 2 cars in various stages of completion. A third waiting under a tarp for its turn. A phone that rang more often now, with people asking about restorations, people who'd heard about his work from Richard or Marcus, or someone who'd seen the Camaro at a show. It was happening. Slowly, painfully, but happening. "I can put you on salary," Ethan said. "Not as much as the construction job, but steady. And when we finish the GTO, there's a bonus. A real one." "How real?" $5,000. Mason's eyebrows went up. You're serious? I need you here. I can't do this without you. You've got Tommy now. Tommy's good, but he's not you. You know how I think. You keep me from doing stupid shit, and you're the only person other than Emma who tells me the truth when I need to hear it. Mason was quiet for a long moment, staring at the GTO like it might have answers. All right, he said finally. I'm in. But if this goes sideways, you're buying the beer for the rest of your life. Deal. They shook on it, and Ethan added another line item to his growing list of expenses, but it was worth it. Mason staying meant the work would get done right. Meant he wasn't alone in this anymore. The GTO was finished in early November, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Marcus drove down to inspect it personally, walked around the car 3 times without saying a word, then climbed in and fired up the engine. The rebuilt 400 cubic inch V8 roared to life, settled into a lopey idle that promised violence if you mashed the throttle. Marcus sat behind the wheel for a full minute, listening, before shutting it off and climbing out. This is exactly what I wanted. Good. Better than good. This is honest work. No bullshit, no cutting corners. He pulled out his checkbook, wrote the remaining payment right there in the garage. I've already told 4 people about you. Expect calls. True to his word, the calls started coming. A guy with a 70s Chevelle that needed a frame-off restoration. Another with a Corvette that had been in a garage fire and needed everything replaced. A woman who'd inherited her father's 68 Roadrunner and wanted it brought back to life. More work than Ethan could handle alone, even with Mason and Tommy. By December, Ethan had enough confidence in the business to move Emma out of the terrible apartment and into a small house on the east side. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a garage where he could work on smaller projects, but it was theirs. The first night in the new house, Emma ran through every room twice, claiming the bedroom with the window seat, declaring the backyard perfect for the dog they didn't have yet, but she was already campaigning for. Claire came over for dinner that first week, brought a housewarming gift, a framed photo of Emma and Ethan from the garage, both covered in grease and grinning. I was wrong, Claire said quietly while Emma was upstairs. About the garage. About you risking too much. You made it work. We're not rich. No, but you're stable. You're present. Emma's happy. That's more than I thought you'd pull off 6 months ago. Ethan looked at his sister, this woman who'd caught him when he fell and never let him forget she was there. Thank you for everything. Just don't screw it up now that you've got momentum. I'll try not to. There was still 1 car left under a tarp in the garage. The Pantera, the crown jewel. The car that could change everything if he did it right. Ethan pulled the tarp off one night after everyone else had gone home, stood there in the quiet, looking at the low red wedge of Italian aggression. He'd been avoiding it, saving it, treating it like something too precious to risk. But the truth was simpler. He was scared of messing it up, scared it wouldn't be worth what he hoped, scared that his one shot at something truly special would prove he'd been fooling himself all along. His phone buzzed. Text from Emma. Are you coming home for dinner? On my way. He covered the Pantera back up, locked the garage and drove home to his daughter, to the house they could afford now, to the life he'd built with his hands from parts everyone else had thrown away. The Pantera could wait a little longer. Some things were worth savoring. The call came on a Tuesday morning in January while Ethan was elbow deep in a Chevelle's transmission trying to coax a synchronizer ring into place that didn't want to cooperate. His phone buzzed against his hip 3 times before he gave up, wiped his hands on a rag that was more grease than fabric, and answered without checking the number. This is Ethan. Mr. Cole, this is Jennifer Park from the City Planning Commission. Do you have a few minutes to discuss the Fletcher Street property? Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. The city only called when something was wrong. What about it? We're finalizing infrastructure plans for the Riverside Industrial District redevelopment. Your property falls within the affected zone. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the project timeline and potential impacts to your business. What kind of impacts? It would be better to discuss in person. Are you available Thursday at 2? Ethan agreed because refusing seemed worse, hung up, and stood there staring at the Chevelle without seeing it. Redevelopment was developer speak for bulldozers and eminent domain, for being offered pennies on the dollar and told to be grateful. He'd bought this garage for $1,000 and turned it into something that mattered, and now the city was going to take it away because some developer wanted to build condos nobody could afford. Mason walked over with a parts catalog. You good? You look like someone died. City planning just called. Want to meet about redevelopment. Shit. Yeah. Tommy appeared from under the Corvette they'd been working on, rolling out on a creeper with oil in his hair. What's redevelopment mean? Means someone with money wants our land, Mason said, and the city's going to help them take it. Ethan shook his head. We don't know that yet. Could be nothing. When has the city ever called about nothing? Fair point. Ethan tried to focus on the Chevelle, but his hands weren't steady enough for precision work. He ended up in the office, pulling up the city's website, searching for information about Riverside Industrial District. What he found made his stomach knot. The redevelopment plan was massive, 30 blocks slated for mixed-use development, apartments, retail, office space, the kind of project that transformed neighborhoods and displaced everyone who'd been there before. Fletcher Street sat right in the middle of the proposed zone, highlighted in bright yellow on the planning map like a target. Thursday's meeting was in a conference room at City Hall that smelled like old coffee and desperation. Jennifer Park turned out to be a woman in her 40s wearing a suit that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, carrying a tablet and an expression that suggested she'd had this conversation too many times to enjoy it anymore. Thank you for coming, Mr. Cole. She gestured to a chair across from her. I wanted to discuss this personally, rather than just sending paperwork. Appreciate that. Ethan sat, hands clasped on the table. So what's happening? Jennifer pulled up a map on her tablet, turned it so he could see. The city has partnered with Hart Acquisitions and several other developers to revitalize the Riverside Industrial District. The project includes new housing, commercial space, and significant infrastructure improvements. Roads, utilities, green spaces. Hart Acquisitions. Isabella's company. Of course. Where does my property fit in this? Your lot is currently zoned industrial, which doesn't align with the new development plans. We're working with property owners to either rezone or relocate. And if I don't want to do either? Jennifer's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. The city has the authority to exercise eminent domain for projects deemed in the public interest. However, we prefer to work with owners toward mutually beneficial solutions. How much are you offering? We haven't finalized assessments yet, but based on comparable sales in the area, somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 for your lot. Ethan almost laughed. The garage alone was worth more than that now, never mind the business he'd built inside it. I bought that property for $1,000 11 months ago. I've put another $200,000 into renovations and equipment. You're telling me the city's offer is less than what I've invested? The assessment is based on land value and building condition, not business operations or equipment. She said it like she was reading from a script. If you have documentation of improvements, we can review them and potentially adjust the offer. And if the offer doesn't come close to what the property is actually worth, then we work toward a compromise. But Mr. Cole, I'll be direct with you. This project is happening. The City Council has already approved it. Hart Acquisitions has committed $300 million. Fighting this will be expensive and ultimately unsuccessful. Ethan sat back in his chair processing. $300 million. That was the kind of money that crushed people like him without noticing. When do you need an answer? We're moving forward with preliminary work in March. We'd like to have agreements in place by February 15th. Less than 6 weeks. Ethan stood up, extended his hand. Thanks for the meeting. Jennifer shook it. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but the city is prepared to be fair. We're not trying to push you out. Just taking my property whether I want to sell or not. It's not personal, Mr. Cole. It's progress. Ethan left City Hall feeling like he'd been sucker punched. He sat in his truck in the parking garage for 20 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to figure out what the hell to do. Calling a lawyer seemed smart, but expensive. Fighting the city seemed noble, but stupid. And underneath everything was the sick realization that Isabella Hart had somehow managed to screw him twice. First by selling him a property she thought was worthless, now by taking it back now that he'd made it valuable. He drove to the garage instead of going home. Mason and Tommy were still there, working late on the Corvette. They took one look at his face and stopped. That bad? Mason asked. Worse. Ethan explained the meeting, the timeline, the offer that was barely more than what he'd originally paid. They're giving me 6 weeks to agree or they'll just take it anyway. Tommy's eyes went wide. They can do that? Eminent domain. Government can seize private property if they claim it's for public good. They pay you what they think it's worth, and you get to deal with it. That's bullshit, Mason said. That's the law. They stood there in the garage that had become something more than just a workplace. Ethan looked around at the tools he'd accumulated, the lift he'd finally been able to afford, the paint booth Mason had helped him build in the back corner. The Pantera still sat under its tarp, waiting, all of it about to be erased because someone with more money had decided this land was worth more empty than it was with him in it. "So what are you going to do?" Tommy asked. "I don't know yet." Mason grabbed 3 beers from the mini fridge in the office, handed them out. "Here's what I know. You didn't come this far to roll over because the city says so. I also didn't come this far to bankrupt myself fighting a battle I can't win. Maybe you can't win, but maybe you can negotiate better terms. Make them pay what the place is actually worth." Ethan took a long drink. The beer was cheap and cold and didn't make anything clearer. "Even if they pay fair value, where do I go? Commercial real estate in this city is insane. Anything in a decent location costs 5 times what I could get for this place." "Then don't stay in the city?" "Emma's school is here, Claire's here, everything's here. Everything except your business in 6 weeks if you don't figure something out." Tommy cleared his throat. "What about buying land now, before they finalize everything? If you know the area is developing, property values are going to spike. Buy something nearby, move the business there, sell this place for whatever they're offering, and come out ahead." Both Ethan and Mason turned to look at him. Tommy shrank a little under their attention. "Sorry, is that stupid?" "That's not stupid at all," Ethan said slowly. "That's actually smart as hell." The idea crystallized as he said it. If the city was planning $300 million in development, surrounding property values would explode. Industrial lots nobody wanted now would be worth real money in a year. He could buy cheap, relocate the business, then either sell this place for the city's offer or hold out and force them to pay more. Either way, he'd end up better positioned than he was now. "I need to see that planning map again," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. He spent the rest of the night researching, pulling tax records, looking at satellite imagery of the area surrounding the development zone. Most of the good locations were already owned by hard acquisitions or other developers, but there were gaps. A few lots that had been overlooked or deemed not worth the effort. Industrial parcels on the fringes that weren't pretty, but were functional. One property kept catching his attention, a lot 3 blocks east of his current garage, bigger than what he had now, with an existing warehouse structure that would need work but had good bones. It was listed by a small property management company for $250,000, more than Ethan wanted to spend, but potentially worth it if Tommy's theory was right. He called the listing agent the next morning, a bored-sounding guy named Derek, who seemed surprised anyone was interested in the property. "It's been sitting for 8 months, Derek said. Previous owner used it for automotive fabrication, went out of business during COVID. The building needs work. Roof leaks, electrical is sketchy, but the footprint's solid. I'd like to see it." "When?" "Today, if possible." Derek met him at the property 2 hours later. The warehouse was exactly as advertised, rough around the edges, neglected, full of potential. The main bay was twice the size of Ethan's current garage, with high ceilings and industrial power already run. The office space was trashed, the bathrooms were disgusting, and there was definitely something dead in the walls based on the smell. But the roof was metal and repairable. The foundation was poured concrete, and the location was perfect, close enough to his current spot that he wouldn't lose the neighborhood connections he'd built, far enough from the development zone that the city wouldn't be knocking on his door again in 6 months. "What's the absolute bottom dollar on this?" Ethan asked. Derek shrugged. "Owner's motivated, lost money on it already. I'd guess they'd take $225 if you can close fast." Ethan did math in his head. He had about $70,000 in the bank from the Mustang and GTO sales. The city would pay maybe $100 for his current property if he was lucky. That left him short by at least $50,000, probably more once he factored in moving costs and renovations. "I need to think about it." "Don't think too long, I've got another showing next week." Probably a lie, but Ethan nodded anyway. He walked the property alone after Derek left, making notes on his phone, taking pictures, trying to see past what it was to what it could become. A real shop. Professional. Big enough to handle multiple builds at once. The kind of place that didn't look like a condemned garage someone bought for pocket change. His phone rang. Emma's school. His heart jumped before he answered. Mr. Cole, this is Mrs. Patterson from the office. Emma's fine, but she's not feeling well. Can you pick her up? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Emma was waiting in the nurse's office when he arrived, looking pale and miserable. The nurse said it seemed like a stomach bug. Nothing serious, but she shouldn't be at school. Ethan signed her out and carried her to the truck, even though she insisted she could walk. My stomach hurts, she said once they were driving. I know, kiddo. We'll get you home and you can rest. Are you mad? Why would I be mad? Because you had to leave work. Ethan glanced at her, this small person who worried about things she shouldn't have to worry about. Emma, you're more important than work. Always. She was quiet for a moment. Daddy, are we going to have to move again? His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why do you ask that? I heard you on the phone last night, talking about the city taking the garage. He thought she was asleep. Should have known better. We might have to move the business, but not our house. You'll stay in your school. Promise? Promise. She fell asleep on the couch 20 minutes after they got home, curled under a blanket with her dinosaur pillow clutched to her chest. Ethan sat on the coffee table watching her breathe, thinking about the warehouse, the money he didn't have, the timeline that was ticking down whether he was ready or not. His phone buzzed. Text from Mason. You see the news? What news? Mason sent a link. Local Business Journal article about the Riverside development. The headline read, Hart Acquisitions Leads Major Downtown Revival. The article detailed the project, quoted Isabella talking about bringing new life to forgotten neighborhoods, included renderings of gleaming apartment buildings and trendy retail spaces. At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was a paragraph about current property owners being offered relocation assistance. Relocation assistance. Like that made up for being forced out. Ethan called Mason. You read the whole thing? Yeah, she's making herself sound like a hero, revitalizing the community and all that bullshit. She doesn't even remember selling me that property. To her, I'm just another obstacle between her and her $300 million payday. So remind her. How? Go to her office. Make her look you in the eye while she explains why you should be grateful she's stealing your business. It was aggressive and probably pointless, but it was also exactly what Ethan wanted to do. I'll think about it. Emma slept through the afternoon. Ethan sat in the kitchen with his laptop, running numbers that didn't work no matter how he arranged them. Even if the city paid $100,000 for his current property, even if he negotiated the warehouse down to $200,000, he'd be cleaned out with nothing left for renovations or equipment moves or the 6 months of operating expenses he'd need as cushion. Unless he sold the Pantera now, instead of waiting. The thought made his chest hurt. The Pantera was supposed to be the crown achievement. The car that put his name on the map. The restoration that proved he belonged in conversations with the big shops. But it was also worth real money. The car was mostly complete, just needed detailed work. He could sell it as is to a collector, probably get $60,000 or $70,000 for it in current condition. Enough to make the warehouse purchase work. He pulled up the Pantera's photos on his laptop, scrolling through shots he'd taken when he first uncovered it. The red paint faded, but still dramatic. The Italian curves aggressive and low. The Ford 5.8 engine lurking behind the seats promising absurd speed. It was the kind of car people built entire collections around. What are you looking at? Ethan jumped. Emma was standing in the doorway, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cape. Shouldn't you be resting? I'm bored. Is that the special car? The Pantera, yeah. Emma climbed into the chair next to him, peered at the screen. It looks mean. It's supposed to. Italian supercar with an American engine, best of both worlds. Are you going to fix it? Trying to decide if I should sell it instead. But you said it was special. It is, but we might need the money for other things. Emma was quiet, studying the photo with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered to her. If you sell it now, will you be sad? Probably. Then don't. It's not that simple, kiddo. Why not? You always tell me not to give up on things that are important. The car is important to you. Out of the mouths of children. Ethan closed the laptop. You're supposed to be resting, not giving me life advice. I can do both. She leaned against his shoulder. My stomach feels better. Good. You want soup? Can we have grilled cheese instead? They made grilled cheese together, Emma standing on a chair to help flip the sandwiches while Ethan monitored the stove. They ate in front of the TV watching a nature documentary about wolves that Emma had seen 12 times but never got tired of. Normal moments in a life that felt increasingly unstable. After Emma went to bed, Ethan pulled up Isabella Hart's company website. Hart Acquisitions occupied a glass tower downtown with a lobby that probably cost more than most people's houses. The website listed office hours, contact information, a calendar of upcoming public meetings about the Riverside project. There was a community input session scheduled for next week. Ethan marked it in his phone. If he couldn't get Isabella's attention privately, maybe he could get it publicly. Force her to acknowledge that her development project was destroying real businesses, real livelihoods. It was a long shot, but long shots were all he had. The weekend came and went. Ethan spent Saturday at the garage with Mason and Tommy, making progress on the Corvette while trying not to think about the February 15th deadline. Sunday was Emma's day. They went to a trampoline park where she jumped until she was exhausted, and he watched from the sidelines, feeling older than his years. Monday morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the garage. Legal documents from the city. Formal notice of eminent domain proceedings. The offer was exactly what Jennifer Park had predicted, $95,000 for the property, take it, or prepare for a legal battle he couldn't afford. Ethan left the envelope on his desk and went back to work on the Corvette because it was easier than facing reality. Tommy found him 2 hours later, still under the car, not really accomplishing anything. "Hey, boss, you okay?" "Fine. You've been torquing the same bolt for 20 minutes. Ethan rolled out from under the car. "I got the official offer from the city." "How bad?" "Bad enough." Tommy sat on an overturned bucket, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been with them long enough now to feel comfortable speaking his mind. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you doing this? The garage, the cars, all of it. You could go get an engineering job somewhere. Probably make more money with less stress." "I tried that. Nobody's hiring washed-up engineers in their 30s. But if they were, if you got offered a job tomorrow with a salary and benefits and all that, would you take it?" Ethan thought about it honestly. "A year ago? Absolutely. 6 months ago? Probably. Now?" He looked around the garage, messy, chaotic, his. "I don't think so." "Why not?" "Because this is mine. Nobody can downsize it or tell me I'm redundant or replace me with someone younger and cheaper. I built this. When Emma asks what I do, I can show her something real." Tommy nodded slowly. "Then don't let the city take it without a fight. Fighting costs money I don't have. So make them pay more. Go to that community meeting. Bring photos of the garage. Show them what they're destroying. Make it awkward for them." "You think that'll work?" "Probably not, but it's better than nothing." The community input session was held in a high school auditorium that smelled like gym socks and institutional cleaning supplies. Maybe 70 people showed up, mostly older folks who'd lived in the Riverside area for decades, and younger activists who opposed any development on principle. Ethan sat in the back row, watching Isabella Hart stand at the front with her development team, presenting slides about economic impact and housing units and community benefits. She was good at this, confident without being arrogant, prepared for every question, deflecting criticism with the kind of smooth professionalism that came from doing this 100 times before. She wore a different suit than the one from their first meeting, but the same expression, focused, competent, in control. When the presentation ended and the floor opened for questions, hands shot up immediately. People asked about parking, about rent costs, about small businesses being displaced. Isabella had answers for everything, polished and precise. Yes, some businesses would need to relocate, but the city was offering fair compensation and relocation assistance. Yes, rents might increase, but the development would create jobs and opportunities. Everything was framed as progress, as improvement, as inevitable. Ethan raised his hand. Isabella's assistant pointed at him. "Yes, in the back." He stood up, suddenly aware of everyone turning to look at him. "My name is Ethan Cole. I own an automotive restoration business at 847 Fletcher Street. The city's offered me $95,000 for my property. I've invested over $200,000 in renovations and equipment. How is that fair compensation?" Isabella's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. "Mr. Cole, the city's assessments are based on standard appraisal methods. If you believe improvements warrant a higher valuation, you can submit documentation for review. I did. They rejected it, said business investments don't count toward property value. The distinction is between real property and personal property. Equipment and business operations are portable. The land and structure are what's being acquired. Except I can't afford to relocate my business anywhere else in the city. So your development isn't just acquiring my property, it's ending my business entirely. A murmur went through the crowd, some sympathetic, some annoyed that he was taking up time. Isabella maintained her professional smile. The Riverside project will create hundreds of jobs and thousands of housing units. While we understand individual relocations can be challenging, the broader community benefit is substantial. The city has resources available to help small businesses transition. Transition to what? Closing? Mr. Cole, I appreciate your concerns, but this forum isn't the appropriate venue for individual negotiations. If you'd like to discuss your specific situation, my office is happy to schedule a meeting. She was shutting him down politely but firmly, the way someone dismisses a child having a tantrum. Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. You sold me that property 11 months ago for $1,000. Told me it was worthless. Now your company's developing the area and suddenly the city wants it back for less than what I've built there. That's not coincidence. Now Isabella's expression did change. The professional mask slipped for just a second, replaced by something colder. Hart Acquisitions operates independently from the city's eminent domain proceedings. And if I recall correctly, Mr. Cole, you were quite eager to purchase that property despite its condition. No one forced you to invest in a location you couldn't afford to lose. The words landed like a slap. Around the auditorium, people shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stood there, face burning, realizing he'd just made everything worse. He'd wanted to embarrass her publicly, and instead she'd embarrassed him. He sat down without another word. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, but Ethan didn't hear any of it. He left as soon as it ended, not bothering to stick around for the networking portion where people milled around eating cookies and pretending to care about community input. Mason called as Ethan was driving home. How'd it go? I made an ass of myself. What happened? Ethan explained the exchange. Mason was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong, though. You did buy a property in a sketchy area without knowing what might happen to it. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. I'm just saying she's got a point. This is how development works. Someone always gets squeezed out. So I should just accept it? I'm saying you should focus on what you can control, which is finding a new location and moving the business before they bulldoze your current spot. Ethan knew Mason was right, but it didn't make it easier to swallow. He spent the drive home thinking about the warehouse Derek had shown him, about the money he didn't have, about selling the Pantera or not selling it, about every decision feeling like choosing between bad options and worse ones. Emma was already asleep when he got home. He stood in her doorway watching her sleep, thinking about the promise he'd made that they wouldn't have to move, that her school wouldn't change, that things would be stable. So far, he'd managed to keep that promise, but keeping it was getting harder. His phone buzzed. Email from an unknown address. He almost deleted it as spam before seeing the subject line, Fletcher Street property. The email was short. Mr. Cole, I'd like to discuss your situation privately. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Isabella Hart. Ethan read it 3 times, looking for the trap. Why would she want to meet after publicly shutting him down? Either she felt bad, which seemed unlikely, or she wanted something. Or maybe she just wanted to explain in private why he was screwed and should stop making scenes at public meetings. He typed back, I'll be there. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least he'd get answers. Ethan arrived at Hart Acquisitions 15 minutes early and spent the time sitting in his truck in the parking garage, second-guessing everything. The building looked even more expensive in daylight, all glass and steel, the kind of architecture designed to intimidate. He'd worn his cleanest jeans and the same button-down shirt from Emma's school breakfast, but walking through the lobby past people in $1,000 suits made him feel like exactly what he was, an outsider who didn't belong. Isabella's assistant was the same woman from his first visit, though she didn't seem to remember him. She led him to the same conference room, not Isabella's personal office, which somehow felt worse, more formal, more this is business, not personal. Isabella walked in exactly at 10, carrying a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Ethan without asking if he wanted it. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting across from him. "Didn't think I had much choice." "You always have a choice, Mr. Cole." She opened the portfolio, pulled out several documents. "I wanted to apologize for last night, the community meeting. I shouldn't have been so dismissive." Ethan hadn't expected that. "Okay." I went back and pulled the file on our transaction, the Fletcher Street sale. I'd honestly forgotten about it until you mentioned it last night. She slid a paper across to him, the original sale agreement they'd signed almost a year ago. $1,000. I remember thinking you were either desperate or crazy. Both, probably. Turns out you were neither. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos. "I did some research last night, found articles about your restorations. The Camaro you sold to Richard Castellano, the GTO for Marcus Webb. People in my circles talk about you. The mechanic who bought a condemned garage and turned it into something legitimate." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Isabella set down her phone. "I made a mistake selling you that property. Not because the price was wrong. It was worth exactly what you paid for it at the time. But because I didn't see what it could become. You did. And now the city wants to take it from you because my company's development plans have made it valuable again." "That about sum it up?" "Yes." She leaned back in her chair. "The eminent domain proceedings are legitimate. The city has the authority to acquire your property, but the compensation is inadequate. We both know it. So what are you proposing?" "I want to buy your property directly, before the city's deadline. $250,000. The number hung in the air between them. More than double the city's offer. Enough to buy the warehouse with money left over for renovations. Enough to make this whole nightmare go away." "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because it's fair. Because you turned that property into something worth more than scrap value. And because I don't like knowing that my business success is built on crushing someone else's." "That's unusually decent of you." Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't canonize me yet. This also benefits me. If you accept my offer, you withdraw your opposition to the development. No more showing up at community meetings. No lawsuit against the city. Clean transition." There it was. The catch. "You want me to go quietly. I want us both to walk away from this feeling like we got something fair. You get enough money to relocate and expand. I get a smoother development process. Everyone wins." Ethan picked up the coffee she'd brought him, took a sip. It was good coffee, the expensive kind that came from beans with their own passport. "And if I say no?" "Then the city proceeds with eminent domain. You get $95,000 and a legal battle you can't afford. Your business dies anyway, just slower and more painful." She wasn't wrong. Ethan hated that she wasn't wrong. "I need time to think about it. You have until Friday. After that, the offer expires and you're back to dealing with the city." "That's 3 days." "That's all the time I can give you. The development timeline is locked in. Every delay costs money." Ethan stood up. "I'll let you know." "Mr. Cole." Isabella stood as well. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. About last night. About all of this. You built something real from nothing. That's rare, I respect it." He wanted to believe her. Wanted to think this wasn't just another negotiation tactic, another move in a game where she held all the cards. But he'd learned enough in the past year to know that sentiment didn't pay bills. "I'll be in touch," he said. The drive back to the garage felt longer than usual. Ethan kept running the numbers in his head. $250,000 for his current property. The warehouse Derek had shown him would cost $225,000, maybe less if he negotiated. That left $25,000 for moving equipment, doing basic repairs, keeping the business running during transition. Tight, but doable. But accepting Isabella's offer meant giving up, meant admitting that people with money could reshape the world however they wanted, and people like him just had to adapt or die. It stuck in his throat like swallowing glass. Mason and Tommy were working on the Corvette when he arrived. Mason took one look at his face and set down his wrench. "What happened?" Ethan explained the meeting, the offer, the deadline. When he finished, Mason whistled low. $250. That's real money. It's hush money. It's also more than you'll get fighting them. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." Tommy spoke up from under the Corvette. "Can I say something?" "Go ahead." "Take the money, move the business, keep building. Pride doesn't pay rent." Mason nodded slowly. "Kid's got a point. You've been grinding for a year to get stable. This gives you stability, better equipment, better location, breathing room. Why is that a bad thing? Because it's not about the money, Ethan said. It's about her thinking she can buy her way out of screwing me over. She's not screwing you over. She's offering you more than fair market value, after her development plans made the property valuable in the first place. So, you played the game and won. Cash out while you're ahead. Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the words that would make his position make sense. Mason was right. Tommy was right. Taking Isabella's offer was the smart play, the safe play. The play that guaranteed Emma kept her school and her house and her father didn't go bankrupt fighting City Hall, but it still felt like losing. He spent the rest of the day working on the Corvette, trying to lose himself in the mechanical simplicity of pistons and valves. Physical work had always quieted his mind, turned problems into puzzles with clear solutions. But today it didn't help. He kept seeing Isabella's face, hearing her apology that might have been genuine or might have been performance. Emma called around 4. "Dad, can you pick me up from Claire's? She has to work late." "On my way." Claire's apartment was in the same complex where Ethan and Emma had stayed after losing the house. Walking into it felt like visiting a past life. Claire answered the door in her pharmacy tech scrubs, looking tired. "Thanks for getting her. I've got a double shift tonight." "No problem. You okay?" "Just tired. You?" Ethan hesitated. "Isabella Hart offered me $250,000 for the garage." Claire's eyebrows went up. "And you haven't taken it yet because it feels wrong." "Ethan, that's more money than you've ever seen. Take it. Please. For once in your life, take the smart option." "I am taking the smart option. I'm just trying to figure out what that is." Claire put her hand on his shoulder. "The smart option is the one that keeps Emma stable. Everything else is ego." Maybe she was right too. Maybe everyone was right except him. Emma appeared from the back room carrying her backpack and a drawing she'd made of a T-Rex eating a pizza. "Ready, kiddo? Can we get actual pizza for dinner?" "Sure." They went to the pizza place Emma loved, the one with the arcade games and the animatronic band that hadn't worked properly in a decade. Emma demolished 3 slices while telling him about a project at school, something about ecosystems and food chains. Ethan listened and nodded and tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to Friday's deadline. "Dad, you're not listening." "Sorry, what?" "I asked if you're okay. You keep staring at nothing." Ethan forced himself to focus on his daughter. "Just thinking about work stuff." "The garage thing? How much do you know about that?" Emma shrugged, picking pepperoni off her pizza. "I know someone wants to buy it and you don't want to sell, but Aunt Claire thinks you should." "Were you eavesdropping?" "You guys talk really loud when you argue." "Fair point. What do you think I should do?" Emma considered the question seriously, the way she approached everything that mattered. "Is the new place going to be better?" "Different. Bigger. But it means leaving the garage I've been fixing up." "But you'd still have the cars, right? And Mason and Tommy?" "Yeah." "Then it doesn't matter where you work. The garage is just a building. You're the one who makes it special. Out of the mouths of children." Again. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Emma was right. He'd been so focused on what he was losing that he'd forgotten what actually mattered. The business wasn't the building, it was the work, the reputation, the relationships with customers who trusted him. All of that was portable. "When did you get so smart?" he asked. "I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." They finished dinner and played skee-ball until Emma ran out of tickets and energy. Driving home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat, head pressed against the window. Ethan looked at her in the glow of passing streetlights and felt the weight of every decision he'd made since she was born. The job he'd lost, the marriage that fell apart, the desperate gamble on a garage nobody wanted. All of it had been about giving her something better than what he'd had. And now he had a chance to actually do that, to take Isabella's money, move to a better location, build something that could last. All he had to do was swallow his pride and accept that sometimes the person with more power won. But winning didn't mean you had to be destroyed in the process. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. "This is Derek. Got another buyer interested in the warehouse. Need to know if you're serious. Can give you until Wednesday." Wednesday. Same day as Isabella's Friday deadline, just 2 days earlier for the warehouse. The universe apparently didn't believe in giving him time to overthink things. Ethan texted back, "I'm serious, preparing offer now." He didn't have an offer prepared. Didn't even know if he was taking Isabella's deal yet. But saying yes kept the option open, and keeping options open had kept him alive this far. Tuesday morning, Ethan called the one lawyer he knew, a guy named Jeff Brennan, who'd helped him with the original garage purchase. Jeff did small-time real estate work, mostly helping people buy houses or fight their landlords. But he knew contracts. "I need you to look at something," Ethan said. They met at a diner near Jeff's office. Ethan laid out both situations, Isabella's offer for the current garage, the warehouse he wanted to buy. Jeff read through everything while eating pancakes, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "The hard offer is clean," Jeff said finally. "Standard purchase agreement. $250, cash, closing in 30 days. Only condition is you withdraw opposition to the development and sign an NDA about the transaction terms." "What's the NDA for?" "She doesn't want you talking about how much she paid you. Makes it harder for other property owners to demand similar deals." That tracked. Isabella Hart hadn't gotten rich by being generous publicly. And the warehouse? Also straightforward. Derek's seller wants $225, cash, as is. No inspection contingencies. Basically, you're buying it sight unseen at your own risk. "Can we get them lower?" Jeff shrugged. "You can try. But if there's really another buyer, you don't have much leverage. How soon do you need to decide?" "Tomorrow for the warehouse. Friday for Isabella's offer." "That's tight." Jeff finished his coffee. "Here's my advice as your lawyer and your friend. Take both deals. Sell to Isabella, buy the warehouse, use the extra 25 grand to make the new place functional. You come out ahead with a better location and cash reserves. And if the warehouse turns out to be a disaster, that's the risk. But you took a bigger risk buying the Fletcher Street place for $1,000, and that worked out." Ethan sat back in the booth. Everyone kept saying the same thing. Take the money, move on, stop fighting battles you can't win. Maybe they were all right, and he was just being stubborn. "Draw up an offer for the warehouse," he said. $220 cash. Close in 30 days contingent on me selling the current property. You're asking them to wait on your other deal? They can take it or leave it, but I'm not buying a new place until I know for sure I can sell the old one. Jeff made notes. I'll send it over today. What about Isabella? Let me think about it until Thursday. You're cutting it close. I know. Back at the garage, Ethan found Mason and Tommy standing around the Pantera. Someone had pulled the tarp off. In the afternoon light streaming through the bay door, the red paint looked better than it had in the dark. Still faded, still damaged, but undeniably beautiful. "We were talking," Mason said carefully, "about the Pantera." "What about it?" "You've been avoiding it. Every other car in here gets worked on except this one." Ethan walked around to the car, running his hand along the dusty hood. "It's the last one. Once it's done, that's it. The original batch is gone. So start it. Get it running. See what you've got. And if I can't make it work, then you can't. But sitting under a tarp isn't making it better." Tommy chimed in. "I've been reading about these cars. If it's complete and the body's solid, it could be worth 200 grand restored, maybe more. 200,000. Enough to change everything. Enough to make the warehouse purchase easy. To give Emma the stability she deserved. To prove that the gamble on Fletcher Street had been worth it. All right, Ethan said. Let's see what we've got. They spent the rest of the day on the Pantera. The doors were locked, but Ethan picked them with a screwdriver and a coat hanger the way his father had taught him. The interior was dusty but intact. Leather seats cracked but not destroyed. Dash complete. Gauges present. The engine bay revealed the 351 Cleveland Phoebe 8 sitting silent and mysterious under years of grime. First thing is seeing if it'll turn over, Ethan said. Check the oil, coolant, see if anything's obviously wrong. The oil was ancient but present. Coolant was dry. Spark plugs looked salvageable. They pulled the fuel tank, found it still had gas from whenever the car was last driven. Probably decades old, definitely useless. We're going to need to flush everything, Mason said. Fuel system, cooling system, brake system, basically assume every fluid is contaminated. It was tedious work, the kind that took days of careful attention, but it was also hopeful. The more they inspected, the more Ethan realized the car was complete. Really complete. Not just the major components, but the little things. Trim pieces, fasteners, the factory toolkit still in the trunk. Someone had loved this car once, had cared enough to keep it whole even while letting it sleep. Wednesday afternoon, Jeff called. Seller accepted your offer on the warehouse 220 contingent on your current property sale. 30-day close. Seriously? The other buyer was apparently lower and wanted 90 days. You're giving them cash and speed. They'll take it. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. So if I take Isabella's deal, then you're locked in. You'll have to buy the warehouse. Can I back out if something goes wrong? Not without losing your earnest money. How much are you putting down? What's standard? 5%, so 11 grand. $11,000, more than he'd had in his bank account a year ago. Now just the deposit on a property he hadn't even fully inspected. The scale of what he was doing hit him all at once. Send the paperwork, Ethan said. I'll get you the deposit by Friday. After hanging up, he sat in the garage office with his laptop, looking at his bank account. $73,000 from the Mustang and GTO sales, minus $11,000 for the warehouse deposit, minus the rent and utilities he still owed, minus the parts orders he'd placed for the Corvette. He'd have maybe 50 grand left until Isabella's money came through, assuming he took her offer, assuming nothing went wrong. Thursday morning, Ethan drove Emma to school and then sat in the parking lot afterward, staring at his phone. He'd drafted the email to Isabella 3 times, deleted it twice, rewritten it again. Finally, he just typed what he was thinking. Miss Hart, I'll accept your offer. $250 for the Fletcher Street property, closing in 30 days. I need the earnest money by Friday to secure my next location. Ethan Cole. He sent it before he could change his mind. The reply came 15 minutes later. Agreed. My attorney will send the contract today. Earnest money will transfer Friday morning. Thank you for being reasonable about this. 8. Being reasonable. Was that what this was? Or was it just accepting that he couldn't fight every battle? Ethan didn't know. But he'd made the choice, and now he had to live with it. He called Mason. It's done. I took Isabella's deal. Good. You made the right call. Hope so. What's next? Next, we finish the Corvette, deliver it, and start packing. We've got 30 days to move an entire shop. We can do that. Yeah, we can. The earnest money for the warehouse came through Friday morning, pulled from the advance Isabella's company had wired. $11,000 transferred to an escrow account, making the warehouse purchase real. Ethan signed more documents that day than he'd signed in his entire life. Purchase agreements, NDAs, disclosure forms. His signature started looking sloppy by page 20. Friday afternoon, Richard Castellano showed up at the garage unannounced, driving the Camaro Ethan had restored. The orange paint gleamed in the winter sun. Heard you're moving, Richard said, climbing out of the car. News travels fast. Small community, classic car people talk. He walked into the garage, looked around at the equipment, the Corvette on the lift, the Pantera still partially disassembled. Where are you going? Ethan told him about the warehouse, about the development forcing his hand. Richard listened without interrupting. That's a tough break, Richard said when Ethan finished, but it sounds like you're landing on your feet. Trying to. Listen, I came by because I wanted to invite you to something. There's a collector auction in March, Vintage Motors. Big event. A-list buyers, serious money. I'm putting the Camaro in it. Ethan felt his stomach drop. You're selling it? Not personally, but I told the auction house about you, about your work. They're interested in having you consign a piece. Something that shows what you can do. Thought maybe that Pantera might be ready by then. The Pantera's not close to finished. March is 3 months away. Think about it. Auction exposure would be huge for your business. Put you on the map with serious collectors. It was an opportunity too good to turn down and too terrifying to accept. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. They need to finalize the catalog by end of January. After Richard left, Ethan stood staring at the Pantera. 3 months to finish a complete restoration on a car he'd barely started. It was impossible. Insane. Exactly the kind of deadline that would consume every waking hour and leave no room for error. Mason walked over, following his gaze. You're thinking about it. I'd have to be crazy to try. You were crazy to buy this garage. You were crazy to think you could restore cars for a living. Crazy's been working out pretty well for you. This is different. How? This is public. If I fail, everyone sees it. Every collector, every potential customer. My reputation dies before it's even built. Mason clapped him on the shoulder. Then don't fail. That night, Ethan sat with Emma at the kitchen table while she did homework. She was working on long division, tongue sticking out in concentration. He was working through a parts list for the Pantera, trying to figure out what was salvageable and what needed replacing. Dad, what's 845 divided by 13? Ethan did the math in his head. 65. Emma wrote it down, checked her work. Are you nervous about the new garage? A little. Change is always scary. But it's good change, right? I think so. Hope so. She looked up from her homework. Madison's family is moving. Her dad got a new job in another state. She's really sad about it. The girl you fought with? Yeah, we're friends now. Kind of. What changed? Emma shrugged. I told her I was sorry for hitting her. She said she was sorry for being mean. Then we ate lunch together and talked about dinosaurs. That easy? Sometimes things are easier than you think they'll be. Ethan smiled. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't always notice. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Ethan sat in the living room with a beer and his laptop, looking at photos of the Pantera from every angle. The car had been sitting in that garage for probably 40 years, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Now he had 3 months to do it. 3 months to prove Richard's faith in him wasn't misplaced. 3 months to show Isabella Hart and the city and everyone who'd ever doubted him that he belonged in this world. He opened his email and typed a message to Richard. Count me in for the auction. The Pantera will be ready. He sent it before the doubt could stop him. The next morning, he called Mason and Tommy in early. They stood around the Pantera in the cold garage, breath fogging in the air. We've got 90 days, Ethan said, to finish this car and move the entire shop to a new location. It's going to be brutal. What else is new? Mason said. Tommy grinned. Let's get to work. They pulled the engine that weekend, hauled it to a machine shop for a complete rebuild, stripped the interior down to bare metal, started cataloging every part, every piece, every component that would need attention. The work was overwhelming, but it was also clarifying. No more wondering what to do with the Pantera. No more avoiding it. Just work. Pure, focused work. By the end of January, they'd made real progress. The engine came back from the machine shop rebuilt and balanced. The transmission was torn down, inspected, reassembled with new synchros and bearings. The body was in paint prep, Carlos working his magic to bring the red finish back to life. And the closing date for both properties was approaching fast. 30 days had seemed like forever when Ethan signed the contracts. Now it felt like 30 minutes. February arrived cold and gray. The warehouse needed more work than Ethan had budgeted for. The electrical panel was a fire waiting to happen. The roof leaked in places Derek's listing hadn't mentioned. The bathrooms needed to be gutted and rebuilt. Every day brought a new expense, a new problem, a new reason to panic. But the Pantera kept coming together. New interior installed, black leather with red piping. Chrome polished until it reflected like mirrors. Engine mounted back in the bay, fuel system rebuilt, brake system upgraded to modern discs. It was starting to look less like a project and more like a car again. The money from Isabella came through on schedule. $250,000 appeared in Ethan's account on a Tuesday morning, and he immediately transferred $214,000 to cover the warehouse closing costs and remaining balance. The rest went to moving expenses, equipment repairs, the endless costs of keeping the business running during transition. Moving day was chaos. Mason rented a truck, and they spent 12 hours hauling tools, equipment, parts, and projects from Fletcher Street to the new warehouse. The Corvette went first, still not quite finished, but drivable. Then the Pantera, transported on a trailer Tommy borrowed from a friend. Finally, all the equipment, lifts, welding gear, compressors, hand tools accumulated over a year of building the business. By midnight, the Fletcher Street garage was empty. Ethan stood in the middle of the bay one last time, looking at oil stains on the concrete where the cars had been, at empty walls where tools had hung. This place had saved him, had given him a chance when nobody else would. And now it was gone. His phone buzzed. Text from Emma. Is it weird that I'm sad about the old garage? Not weird at all. Are you sad? Yeah? But also excited me, too. Ethan locked the bay door for the last time and drove to the new warehouse, where Mason and Tommy were still unpacking. The space was bigger, brighter, more professional. It had potential. It had everything Fletcher Street had been missing, but it didn't feel like home yet. Give it time, Mason said, reading his expression. Everywhere feels wrong until it doesn't. They worked until 2 in the morning, getting enough set up that they could start work in the morning. When Ethan finally made it home, Emma was asleep on the couch, waiting for him. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood in her doorway watching her sleep. 3 weeks until the auction. 3 weeks to finish the Pantera and prove to the world that Ethan Cole wasn't just some mechanic who got lucky. 3 weeks to show everyone what he'd known all along. That sometimes the things other people throw away are exactly what you need to build something extraordinary. The final 3 weeks before the auction became a blur of 16-hour days and coffee that tasted like regret. Ethan worked on the Pantera with the kind of obsessive focus that made everything else fade into background noise. Mason handled the other projects, finishing the Corvette, maintaining customer relationships, keeping the business running while Ethan disappeared into the restoration. Tommy became the bridge between them, running parts, helping wherever he was needed, learning more about cars in 3 weeks than most people learned in 3 years. The new warehouse started feeling less foreign as they filled it with work and noise and the smell of paint and metal. Customers found them despite the address change. Marcus Webb stopped by to check on a project Ethan had quoted him. Richard Castellano brought another collector who wanted a Chevelle restored. The phone kept ringing. The business kept growing. Everything Ethan had hoped for was happening, except he was too exhausted to enjoy any of it. You look like hell, Mason said on a Tuesday morning, watching Ethan fumble with a socket wrench because his hands were shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I'm fine. You're not fine. When's the last time you went home before midnight? Ethan had to think about it. Saturday. That was 4 days ago. The auction's in 12 days. The Pantera needs to be perfect. The Pantera needs to be done. There's a difference. Mason took the wrench from Ethan's hand. Go home. See your daughter. Sleep in a bed instead of that cot in the office. The car will still be here tomorrow. I can't afford to lose time. You're going to lose more than time if you collapse from exhaustion. Go. That's not a suggestion. Ethan wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He drove home in the gray afternoon light, parked in the driveway of the house that still didn't quite feel like his, and walked inside to find Emma doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up, did a double take. You're home early? Mason kicked me out. Good, you look terrible. Everyone keeps saying that. Emma closed her math book. Dad, when's the last time we did something together? Like, actually together, not just you being in the same room while thinking about cars. The question hit harder than it should have. I don't know. I'm sorry. The auction is next Friday, right? Yeah. And then you'll have time. Ethan sat down across from her. Then I'll make time. I promise. You always promise. I know, and I'm going to get better at keeping them. Emma studied him with her 2 old eyes. Mom used to say the same thing before she left. The comparison stung because it wasn't unfair. Sarah had been chasing something too, a version of herself that existed somewhere other than being a wife and mother in a struggling marriage. She'd found it in California with a guy who did something with tech startups and had money that didn't come with oil stains. Ethan had been angry about it for months, then sad, then finally just tired. People left when staying became harder than leaving. He couldn't blame her for that, even if it had destroyed him. I'm not leaving, Ethan said. I'm here. I'm just bad at being present sometimes. So get better at it. I will. Starting now. What do you want to do? Emma's face lit up. Really? Right now? Right now. They went to the trampoline park again, the one where Emma could jump until physics stopped making sense. Ethan watched from the sidelines for a while. Then Emma dragged him onto the trampolines despite his protests that he was too old and too tired. They jumped together, bouncing like idiots. And for an hour, Ethan forgot about the Pantera and the auction and whether he was good enough to belong in that world. When they got home, they made dinner together, spaghetti with jar sauce, because neither of them could cook anything more complicated. They ate in front of the TV watching a documentary about prehistoric ocean creatures that Emma narrated like she'd written it. Normal moments in a life that felt increasingly abnormal. "This is nice," Emma said during a commercial break. "Yeah, it is. We should do it more." "We will." That night, Ethan actually slept in his bed for the first time in days. 8 hours of real sleep that didn't involve waking up to metal clanging or his phone buzzing with parts suppliers. When he woke up Wednesday morning, his hands weren't shaking anymore. Back at the warehouse, Mason and Tommy had made serious progress on the Pantera. The paint was done. Carlos had outdone himself, wet sanding the red until it looked like liquid fire. The chrome was polished. The interior was complete. All that remained was final assembly and sorting the handful of small issues that always appeared at the end of a build. "You were right," Ethan told Mason. "I needed the brake." "I'm always right. You just don't always listen." They spent the next week on details, adjusting the carburetor until the engine idled perfectly, bleeding the brakes until the pedal felt right, testing every electrical component, every switch, every gauge. The Pantera was coming together in a way that felt almost miraculous. A car that had been sleeping for 40 years was waking up, and it was beautiful. Thursday afternoon, 1 week before the auction, Richard Castellano called. "How's the car looking?" "Good. Really good." "Can I see it?" "It's not quite done. I don't need done. I need to see where you're at." Richard showed up an hour later with 2 other men. He introduced them as fellow collectors, both potential buyers at the auction. They walked around the Pantera like priests examining a holy relic, silent and reverent. "This is exceptional work," one of them said finally. "How much of the car is original?" "Engine's rebuilt but original block," Ethan said. "Body's all original metal. We replaced the interior because the old one was destroyed, but everything else is period correct. Even the paint color is factory spec." "What are you estimating for auction value?" Ethan hesitated. He'd done research, looked at comparable sales, talked to people who knew the market, but giving a number felt like inviting judgment. Conservatively, 150 to 170. If the right buyers show up, maybe 180. The collectors exchanged looks. Richard smiled. "I'd say that's low. This car, with your restoration story behind it, could hit 200, maybe more." $200,000. The number Ethan had been afraid to hope for. "You really think so?" "I know so. You're building a reputation, whether you realize it or not. The mechanic who bought a garage for $1,000 and turned it into a legitimate restoration shop. People love that story, and they'll pay for the chance to own a piece of it." After they left, Ethan sat in the office trying to process what Richard had said. 200,000 would change everything, would give him enough capital to take on bigger projects, hire more people, turn the business into something that could actually support his family long term. It would mean he'd done more than survive. He'd actually won. But first he had to get through the auction without screwing it up. The Pantera was finished the Tuesday before the auction. They fired it up one last time, and the engine roared to life with a sound that made Ethan's heart race. Mason took it for a test drive around the block, came back grinning. "This thing is a monster, drives like it's angry at the road." "That's how it's supposed to feel." Tommy appeared from the office. "Auction transport is here." The enclosed trailer looked expensive, the kind of thing that carried cars worth more than houses. The driver walked around the Pantera with a clipboard, documenting every inch, every scratch, every imperfection for insurance purposes. Then he and his partner loaded it with the kind of care usually reserved for explosives. Ethan watched the trailer pull away carrying a year of work and hope and desperation. If something happened to the car between here and the auction venue, he was done. No insurance-covered dreams. "It'll be fine," Mason said, reading his mind. "You don't know that." "Neither do you, so stop assuming the worst." The auction was being held at a convention center downtown, a massive space that had been transformed into something between a car show and an art gallery. Hundreds of classic cars arranged under perfect lighting, each one representing someone's passion or investment or both. Ethan arrived early Friday morning for the preview day, when potential buyers could inspect the cars before Saturday's live auction. The Pantera was positioned in the prime location, center floor, surrounded by space, lit like it was on stage. A placard next to it read, 1972 De Tomaso Pantera, restored by Cole Automotive. Estimate $160,000, to $200,000. Cole Automotive. His business had a name on a placard at a major auction. A year ago, he'd been sleeping in a freezing garage wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Now he was here. Impressive, isn't it? Ethan turned to find Isabella Hart standing behind him. She was dressed differently than in her office. Jeans and a blazer, still expensive but more casual. Less CEO, more person. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I collect cars. Did you think real estate was my only interest?" She gestured at the Pantera. "This is your work?" "Yeah. It's beautiful, really. I've been following your business since our deal closed. You've done well with the new location. Thanks to you forcing me to move." Isabella smiled without offense. "You're welcome. Sometimes the best things happen when we're pushed out of our comfort zones." "Is that what you tell yourself? That you did me a favor?" "No. I tell myself I made a business decision that happened to benefit both of us. You got paid fairly for your property and upgraded to a better space. I got a smoother development process. Everyone won. Except the people who couldn't afford to relocate." "Except them," Isabella agreed. "Progress is messy. People get displaced. Values change. The world reshapes itself around money and power, and people like us choose whether to fight it or adapt to it. And you chose adapt. I chose to understand it. There's a difference." She looked at the Pantera again. "You know what I see when I look at this car? I see someone who understood what I didn't. That value isn't just about the present state of something. It's about potential. You saw potential in a garage I saw as worthless. You saw potential in cars I would have scrapped. And you were right. So what's your point?" "My point is that I was wrong about you. And I wanted to tell you that before tomorrow, when this car sells for more than you're expecting and you realize you've made it." She walked away before Ethan could respond, disappearing into the crowd of collectors and dealers. He stood there feeling off balance, not sure whether he'd just been complimented or manipulated or both. The preview day brought a steady stream of people examining the Pantera. Collectors with notebooks asking technical questions. Investors calculating potential returns. Enthusiasts who just wanted to talk about the car. Ethan answered questions until his voice went hoarse, telling the story of finding the car under a tarp, of the year-long journey to bring it back to life, of the risks and struggles and small victories. By evening, 3 different people had told him they planned to bid. One was a hedge fund manager who collected Italian exotics. Another was a tech entrepreneur who'd made a fortune in cryptocurrency. The third was a retired surgeon who'd owned a Pantera in the 70s and wanted to relive his youth. "Any of them could push this over 200, Richard said. He'd been hanging around all day, introducing Ethan to people, talking up the car like he was on commission. "You nervous?" "Terrified." "Good. Means you care. The day you stop being nervous is the day you've lost your edge." Emma and Claire came by that evening after the preview closed to the public. Emma ran straight to the Pantera, pressing her face against the glass barrier that kept viewers at a distance. "It's so cool, Dad. It looks like a spaceship." "A very fast spaceship." Claire walked around the car more slowly, taking in the details. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For doubting you. For pushing you to give up on the garage. I thought you were being reckless, but you were just being brave. There's a difference. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to keep you safe. But safe isn't always the same as good." She hugged him, surprising both of them. "I'm proud of you. Dad would be too." Their father had died when Ethan was in college, lung cancer from years of breathing in paint fumes and metal dust without proper ventilation. He'd spent his whole life running a tiny repair shop that barely kept food on the table, and he died with nothing to show for it except 2 kids who understood that work meant something more than money. "You think he'd approve of all this?" Ethan asked. "I think he'd say you're doing it smarter than he did. Better tools, better planning, actually charging what the work is worth." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. What if nobody bid? What if the car had a problem he'd missed? What if he'd overestimated the market and the Pantera sold for half what he expected? Every possibility seemed designed to end in disaster. At 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep and drove to the convention center. The security guard recognized him from earlier, let him in to walk the floor. The space was dark except for emergency lighting, all the cars sitting in shadow like sleeping animals. Ethan found the Pantera and stood in front of it, looking at his reflection in the polished paint. A year ago, this car had been a rust bucket under a tarp. Now it was the centerpiece of a major auction. The transformation wasn't just about the car, it was about him, about proving that the world's judgment of value was often wrong, that things other people threw away could become extraordinary with the right attention and care. Couldn't sleep either? Ethan turned to find the retired surgeon standing a few cars away. He was older than Ethan had initially thought, maybe 75, wearing a vintage racing jacket. "Just wanted to see it one more time," Ethan said. The surgeon walked over, stopped next to him. "I owned one of these in 1974, bought it new, drove it for 3 years, had to sell it when my first kid was born. Needed something practical. I've regretted it ever since." "You're bidding tomorrow." "I am, and I'm going to win, regardless of cost. Because some things are worth more than money. They're worth the chance to fix our mistakes. Even if it costs 200 grand, especially if it costs 200 grand, money I can make, time I can't get back." He extended his hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you did something special here. Don't let anyone tell you different." They shook hands, and the surgeon left. Ethan stood alone with the Pantera for another 20 minutes before driving home. This time, he slept. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. The auction started at 10, but Ethan arrived at 8. The convention center was already packed with people: buyers, sellers, staff, media. Camera crews were filming for some automotive show. Photographers were taking shots of the featured cars. The energy was electric. Mason and Tommy showed up at 9, both wearing sports coats that looked uncomfortable but respectful. Emma came with Claire, dressed in a blue velvet dress she'd insisted on wearing because it was a special occasion. They all stood together behind the bidder section, watching the auction floor fill up. The first cars went quickly, selling for expected prices with minimal drama. A Mustang brought $70,000. A Corvette hit $95,000. A Jaguar sold for $120,000. The auctioneer was good, working the crowd with the skill of a performer who understood that buying a car at auction was as much about emotion as economics. The Pantera was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. The wait was torture. Ethan watched other cars sell while his stomach twisted itself into knots. Emma held his hand, squeezing whenever he looked too nervous. "It's going to be okay, Dad," she whispered. "How do you know?" "Because you did good work. And people pay for good work." Finally, just before 2, the auctioneer announced the Pantera. The car was rolled onto the main stage area, spotlights hitting it from every angle. The red paint glowed like fire. The chrome gleamed. It looked perfect. The auctioneer launched into the description. 1972 De Tomaso Pantera, one of approximately 7,300 produced. Comprehensive restoration by Cole Automotive. Numbers matching 351 Cleveland 58, 5-speed ZF transaxle. Factory air conditioning. This is a driver quality restoration, folks. Built to be enjoyed. We'll start the bidding at $100,000. 3 paddles went up immediately. The bidding climbed fast. 110, 120, 130. The hedge fund guy dropped out at 140. The tech entrepreneur stayed in. So did the retired surgeon. Back and forth, $5,000 increments, neither one willing to back down. 150, 160, 170. Ethan stopped breathing somewhere around 175. The entire room was watching now. Other auctions paused because this was getting interesting. 180, 185, 190. The tech entrepreneur hesitated at 190. The auctioneer worked him, cajoling, encouraging. "Come on now, you've come this far. Don't let it go for $5,000. But the tech guy shook his head, lowering his paddle. He was out. The auctioneer turned to the surgeon. "We're at $190,000. Do I hear 195? A new paddle went up. Isabella Hart, sitting 3 rows back, bidding for the first time. The surgeon looked back, surprised. Then he raised his paddle. 200. Isabella didn't hesitate. 205. 210, the surgeon countered. Back and forth they went. 215, 220, 225. The surgeon's face was set, determined. Isabella looked calm, almost amused. At 235,000, the surgeon paused. Ethan could see him calculating, weighing desire against practicality. The auctioneer gave him time, let the moment breathe. Finally, the surgeon shook his head. He was done. Fair warning, the auctioneer said. Last call at $235,000. No other paddles moved. Sold. $235,000 to bidder 347. The room erupted in applause. Ethan stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. $235,000 for a car he'd found under a tarp, for a year of work and worry and betting everything on being right about something everyone else had missed. Emma was jumping up and down, hugging him. Mason was whooping. Tommy looked like he might cry. Claire just smiled, shaking her head like she still couldn't quite believe her little brother had pulled this off. Isabella found him after the auction concluded, after he'd signed the paperwork and arranged for the car to be delivered to her collection in 3 days. Why? Ethan asked. You don't even know if it drives well. I know it drives well. I know because you built it, and you don't do sloppy work. She smiled. Also because I wanted to make a point. What point? That I can recognize value when I see it, even when it takes me a while. She handed him a business card. I have 6 other cars that need restoration. If you're interested in the work, call me. You're serious? Completely. You're good at what you do. I pay well for quality. Seems like a simple transaction to me. She walked away, leaving Ethan holding the card, trying to understand if they'd just become business partners, or if this was another move in a game he didn't fully understand. Maybe it was both. Maybe that was just how the world worked when you got to this level. The auction house transferred the money minus their commission on Monday. $198,000 landed in Ethan's account, the biggest single deposit he'd ever received. He sat in the warehouse office staring at the number, feeling exactly like he had after selling the Camaro and the Mustang, except amplified 100 times. He paid Mason his bonus, doubled it actually, gave Tommy a raise, ordered new equipment the warehouse needed, paid off every outstanding bill, set aside money for Emma's college fund. And when all of that was done, he still had over $100,000 sitting in his account. Insurance against the next disaster, the next unexpected problem, the next time life tried to knock him down. That evening, he took Emma to dinner at a nice restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and menus without prices. She ordered whatever she wanted without asking if it was okay. They ate pasta and talked about everything except cars and money and the auction. Are we rich now? Emma asked over dessert. No, but we're comfortable. What's the difference? Rich means you don't worry about money. Comfortable means you worry less. Emma considered this. I like comfortable. Me too, kiddo. Me too. A week later, the retired surgeon called. I wanted to congratulate you on the sale. I'm disappointed I didn't win, but I'm glad the car went to someone who appreciates it. You could have kept bidding. I could have, but there's a line between wanting something and being stupid about it. 235 was past my line. He paused. I have a different proposition for you. I have a 1973 Pantera that's been in storage for 20 years. It needs everything. Would you be interested in restoring it? How much everything? Complete teardown, rebuild, the works, whatever it takes to make it perfect. Money isn't the issue, quality is. They discussed details, timelines, expectations. By the end of the call, Ethan had another project that would take 6 months and pay 6 figures. The business wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. March turned into April. The warehouse became home in the way the Fletcher Street garage had been. Familiar, comfortable, theirs. Ethan hired 2 more people, both young mechanics looking to learn restoration work. The calendar filled up with projects. The phone kept ringing. Isabella's cars arrived in May. 6 vehicles, ranging from a Jaguar E-Type that needed minor work to a Ferrari that needed everything. She came by the warehouse to inspect the work personally, walked around taking notes on her phone, asked technical questions that proved she actually knew cars beyond just collecting them. I've been thinking about our first meeting, she said as she was leaving. When you came to my office wanting to buy the Fletcher Street property. What about it? I laughed at you, not to your face, but in my head. I thought you were a fool throwing away money on a pipe dream. You weren't wrong. It was kind of a pipe dream. But you made it real. That's the difference between people who succeed and people who just dream. You took the risk everyone else was too smart to take. Or too sensible. Isabella smiled. Same thing, usually. Sensible people rarely change anything. It takes someone a little crazy to see past what is to what could be. After she left, Ethan stood in the warehouse looking at the 6 cars she'd entrusted to him, at the other projects in various stages of completion, at Mason and Tommy and the new hires working on different builds. The space hummed with productivity, with purpose, with the sound of people creating something valuable from pieces everyone else had overlooked. His phone buzzed. Emma texting from school. "Can we go to that trampoline place after you pick me up? Absolutely, you're not too busy?" "Never too busy for you, liar, but I love you anyway." Ethan smiled at his phone. She was right. He'd been too busy plenty of times. But he was getting better at choosing what mattered, better at understanding that building a business meant nothing if he destroyed his relationship with his daughter in the process. That night at the trampoline park, Emma convinced him to race her through the obstacle course. She beat him easily, laughing at how slow he was. They jumped until they were exhausted, then got ice cream and sat in the parking lot eating it while the sun set. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy now? Like, actually happy?" Ethan thought about it honestly. A year ago, he'd been desperate and broke and terrified. Now he had a business, a house, stability. But happiness felt like a bigger question than any of that. It wasn't about the money or the success or even the recognition. It was about sitting in a parking lot eating ice cream with his daughter and not wishing he was somewhere else. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." "Good. You deserve it." "So do you, kiddo." "I know. That's why I keep telling you to spend more time with me." She grinned at him with chocolate ice cream on her face, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Not contentment exactly. More like recognition. He'd spent a year chasing this feeling, the sense that he was building something that mattered, that his work had value, that his life was heading somewhere good. But the feeling had been there all along in moments like this. He'd just been too busy chasing the future to notice the present. Summer came. The Riverside development broke ground, and Ethan watched from a distance as the Fletcher Street garage was demolished. The building that had saved him reduced to rubble in an afternoon. It should have hurt more than it did, but all he felt was a quiet gratitude for what that place had given him when he needed it most. The business kept growing. More customers, more projects, more people wanting Cole Automotive to restore their dream cars. Ethan raised his prices and people paid them without complaint because quality had value and his reputation for quality was solid. In August, Emma started 4th grade. Ethan made a point of being there for the first day, walking her to class, meeting her new teacher. Other parents recognized him from the auction coverage that had appeared in automotive magazines. A few came over to talk cars, but mostly they just treated him like another parent trying to figure out how to raise a kid in a world that felt increasingly complicated. One evening in September, almost exactly a year after moving into the warehouse, Ethan sat in his office doing paperwork while Mason and the crew closed up the shop. His phone rang. Unknown number. "This is Ethan." "Mr. Cole, my name is David Chen. I run the restoration program at the Automotive Heritage Museum. I was hoping we could discuss a potential collaboration." They talked for an hour about a program to teach underprivileged kids automotive restoration, giving them marketable skills while preserving classic cars. The museum had funding but needed someone to run the shop, teach the classes, provide mentorship, someone who understood that restoration was about more than just cars. "Why me?" Ethan asked. "Because your story matters. You're proof that people can rebuild themselves the same way they rebuild cars. That failure isn't final. That value exists in places most people don't think to look. Those are the lessons we want to teach." Ethan said yes without thinking about it too hard. The program would start in January, 2 days a week, teaching kids who reminded him of himself at their age. Hungry. Overlooked. Looking for something to hold on to. In October, Richard Castellano called with news that the Camaro had won Best Restoration at a major car show. In November, the surgeon's Pantera was finished, and the old man cried when he saw it, running his hands over the paint like he was greeting an old friend. In December, Isabella threw a holiday party for her collection, invited Ethan and Emma, treated them like honored guests instead of service providers. By the time the calendar rolled over to a new year, Ethan had been running Cole Automotive for just over 2 years. The business was profitable, growing, sustainable. Emma was happy and stable. The warehouse felt like home. Life had settled into something that looked almost normal if you didn't think too hard about where they'd started. One Saturday in January, Emma asked to come to the warehouse. She'd been asking less lately, getting older, more interested in friends and activities that didn't involve watching her father work. But today, she wanted to come. I have a school project, she explained in the car. We're supposed to interview someone we admire about how they overcame challenges. And you picked me? Obviously, you're like the whole point of the assignment. At the warehouse, Emma pulled out a notebook and her phone to record. She'd prepared questions, serious ones about losing his job, buying the garage, the year of struggling to make it work. Ethan answered honestly, not sugarcoating the fear or the doubt, or the nights he'd thought about giving up. What made you keep going? Emma asked. You. Knowing you were watching, knowing you needed to see that trying was worth it even when it was hard. But what if you'd failed? Then you would have seen that too. That failure happens and you survive it. Emma stopped recording, set down her notebook. Madison's dad lost his job last month. Her family might have to move again. She's really scared. I remember being really scared too. What did you do? I found one thing I could control and focused on that. For me, it was the cars. I couldn't control the economy or the job market or any of the big stuff, but I could control whether I did good work on the Camaro. Emma was quiet for a moment. Can I tell Madison's dad to call you? Maybe you could give him advice or something? Of course. She hugged him, quick and fierce. I'm glad you didn't give up. Me too, kiddo. That evening, Ethan stood alone in the warehouse after everyone had left. He walked through the space, past the projects in various stages of completion, past the tools and equipment that represented thousands of hours of work. The business he'd built from a $1,000 gamble in a condemned garage nobody wanted. He thought about Isabella Hart and what she'd said about value, about seeing potential instead of present state. The truth was, she'd been right about both things. She'd been right to sell him the Fletcher Street garage for $1,000 because that's what it was worth to someone who could only see what it was. And he'd been right to buy it because he'd seen what it could become. The difference between them hadn't been intelligence or resources or even opportunity. It had been willingness to bet on potential over certainty. She'd built her fortune by calculating risks and taking the ones that penciled out. He'd built his by taking a risk that didn't pencil out at all, that required him to be right about a dozen things that nobody else believed in. Both approaches worked. Both had value. But only one had given him what he needed when he needed it most. A chance to prove that his life wasn't defined by what he'd lost, but by what he was willing to build from the pieces that remained. His phone buzzed. Text from Mason. Stop overthinking and go home to your kid. Ethan smiled, locked up the warehouse, and drove home. Emma was waiting at the kitchen table with her school project spread out, still working even though it was past her bedtime. I thought you'd want to see it before I turn it in, she said. The project was a poster board covered in photos. Ethan working on cars, the warehouse, the Pantera at auction. Emma had included a timeline of events starting with Dad buys scary garage and ending with Dad builds successful business. In the center, she'd written, "What I learned. Sometimes the things other people think are worthless are actually treasures waiting for someone who believes in them." Ethan read it twice, feeling his throat get tight. This is really good, kiddo. It's about you, but also about the cars, and kind of about me too. How is it about you? Because Mom thought I was a burden when she left, like I was the thing keeping her from being happy. But you never made me feel that way. You made me feel like I was worth fighting for. Ethan pulled her into a hug, holding on maybe longer than necessary. You are worth fighting for. Always. They stayed like that for a moment, father and daughter in a kitchen, in a house they could afford because he'd taken a risk everyone said was stupid, because he'd seen value where others saw only rust and decay, because he'd believed that with enough work and enough will, anything abandoned could be restored. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Ethan sat on the back porch with a beer looking at the stars. Tomorrow he'd wake up and go to the warehouse and work on someone's dream car. He'd teach a class at the museum, helping kids who needed to believe their circumstances didn't define their futures. He'd come home and have dinner with Emma, help with homework, be present in the way he'd promised to be. It was a good life. Not perfect. Nothing ever was. But good. Built from scraps and second chances and the stubborn refusal to accept that his value had been determined by someone else's assessment. The garage at 847 Fletcher Street was gone now, demolished to make room for Isabella Hart's vision of progress. But what Ethan had built there remained. in the business, in his relationship with Emma, in the proof that sometimes the world's judgment about what matters and what doesn't is completely wrong, that the things other people throw away are sometimes exactly what you need to build something extraordinary, and that the difference between trash and treasure is often just a matter of someone being willing to see what could be instead of settling for what is. Ethan finished his beer, stood up, and went inside. Tomorrow was coming whether he was ready or not. But tonight, sitting in a house he owned with a daughter who loved him and a business that had beaten the odds, he was ready for whatever came next. Because he'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just details.